which has won the Quality Research Award at our university level. Okay. Apart from this, she has produced several papers and has won several medals in the University Research, Invention and Innovation exhibition for her research effort. So I think Professor Selamah Abdullah Yusof is here with us this morning.
Yes.
So Prof, I would like to pass the floor to you to deliver your lecture, inshallah.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Zahra. Welcome.
Recording in progress.
Welcome to this session. May Allah guide us and bless this session. So today, let me just share my screen first. Right, so today my topic is on consumption from the microeconomics side or part. So the plan for this lecture is, first I will give you some basic economic concepts related to consumption and consumer behavior. And then we will look a little bit from the conventional perspective and make some general comments from the Islamic perspective, looking at what's the objective of the consumer and what would be the concept of rationality from the conventional perspective. Then we'll focus a little bit more from the Islamic perspective, looking at the role of man and what is the objective of man, and in particular in relation to consumption. Then, I will provide some guiding principles related to consumption and consumer behavior from the Islamic perspective. Then what we're going to do is just give a summary of the comparison between the Islamic perspective and conventional perspective. And lastly, I will make use of the latest World Value Survey data to give some simple empirical analysis to see whether individuals' thinking and therefore their behavior, whether it's more consistent from the conventional perspective or from the Islamic perspective. All right, so that's the plan. Now, what you are going to see actually is that some of the things that I will discuss, especially from the Islamic perspective, would be things that probably you have heard in the earlier lectures. Because after all, we share the same worldview, the Islamic worldview. And the Islamic worldview is, applies to all aspects of our life. So, but hopefully what I'm going to do is try and put it in the context of consumption and consumer behavior. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. So the first thing is, when we talk about consumption or consumer behavior, we want to know, okay, what is a consumer? So consumer is basically, either refers to an individual or a household comprised of one or more individuals. Okay, and then what does it do? Basically, it is the basic economic concept, basic economic unit, because after all, we're looking from the microeconomics part that determines, that determines which commodities are purchased and in what quantities. So in this, aspect, that actually we are all consumers. So this is something that we can actually relate to, all right? Because we will determine what to buy, how much to buy, and so on. Okay, so when we talk about commodities, basically we're referring to either goods or services. So commodities are something that we can trade, we buy or we sell. So goods can refer to something which is tangible, like cars, books, even salt or clothing, all right? Or it can refer to services such as, banking services or dental services, or mobile phone services, and, all sorts of other services, okay? So basically the consumer, all right, when it wants to determine what commodities to buy and in what quantity, what we will do as consumers is to actually look at the benefits and the cost of such action. Okay, so in this aspect, when we talk about benefits and costs, it can be quite subjective, and when before that, all right, of course, when we say, okay, whenever we want to buy something, we're not, like actually explicitly measuring, what would be the benefits in quantitative terms, measure every single thing and the cost. But it is, assume that implicitly we're doing that, all right? We are doing that. So this is, even in conventional economics, we don't assume that we take, explicit calculations, but we do take into account, whatever benefits and whatever costs that involves in the decision whether to buy something or not. Okay, but however, all right, sometimes we may not be totally aware about the full benefits and or the cost of a certain action that we take, all right, or in particular in the purchase of goods or services. So many times, we will tend to overlook costs that are not explicit. So usually when we want to buy something, we would look at, perhaps the price of the good and we'll say, okay, this is, cheap or this is expensive. But there are actually other costs and perhaps other benefits to, a certain decision, in particular in the purchase of something. Okay, so in here, I've said the opportunity cost and the external cost. So what do we mean by the opportunity cost? The opportunity cost is actually the value of the next best alternative. So for instance, if you have, certain times and you want to decide, do you want to watch a movie or, your next best alternative is to, let's say, mow your lawn. All right. So if you watch a movie, then the opportunity cost is actually the value of you get from mowing the lawn. Okay, or vice versa. So, or if you decide, whether to take a train or to drive. All right. So if you decide to take a train, the opportunity cost is actually the value of driving instead of taking a train. So sometimes when we want to make a decision in terms of the cost, we don't take into account the opportunity cost, the next best alternative, what would be the value to it. Okay, and there's also, the external cost of an activity. I think in the last week's lecture, you talk about externality, or the lecturer talks about, or the instructor talks about the externality. So we can talk about, having the external cost to an activity, cost that, does not or falls upon other people that are not directly involved in that activity. So for instance, if you, burn leaves after you mow the lawn, for instance, and the smoke from the fire will affect other people, your neighbors, for instance. So there are external costs to such activity, which sometimes we do not take into account. Of course, here we are looking at the cost, but there are also the benefits. All right, we can have also the external benefit. So we can take a similar kind of example. If you decide to put up a bright light to lighten up your house, outside of your house at night, so your neighbor can also benefit from it because it will deter intruders from coming in. So whatever actions that we take, there are actually cost or benefits that are imposed on others, right? And sometimes when we make decisions, we don't take into account such things. Okay, so when you don't do these things, then sometimes we may end up with having bad decisions because we ignore this cost or the benefits to it. Okay, so when we talk about what is meant by a rational consumer will make decisions related to consumption according to the cost and benefit criterion. Okay, so he or she will take action if and only if the benefits exceeds cost. So as we said before, although we do not, measure or explicitly list down all the benefits and the costs, but at times we do not take the full benefits or the full cost of such action. Okay, so now we just want to look at the conventional perspectives of rationality. There are several perspectives, so I'm just going to give you the one that is most common if you refer to the basic or introductory or intermediate level microeconomics course and so on. You'll find that the standard of rationality is the self-interest standard of rationality. So what do we mean by the self-interest standard of rationality? Here it is assumed that the person will put most of the weight only on the cost and benefits that accrue directly to themselves. So in a way, forget about other people. Okay, so we will take or make decisions on choices based on what is of benefit or as cost to us. All right, and so it doesn't take into account what other if other people's happy about it or not happy about it, it doesn't really matter. So this self-interest standard of rationality means that okay, what is good to me only, all right, or what is not good to me. Okay, so it's not trying to make other people happy or trying to do the right things. This is not part of the self-interest standard of rationality. So in a sense that, the word itself is self-interest, okay? So usually in economics, we refer to this kind of individuals as homo economicus, or the economic man or woman or individual, okay? So, but the irony of this, perspective is that it actually carries a degree of social isolation because it is, focuses on very narrow and material interests. Okay, so there is another perspective, what we call the present aim standard of rationality. So in this case, what it is saying is, individuals are rational, okay, because whatever that they happen to hold at the moment in terms of the aims and objectives, that would be works fine. All right, it works fine. So in a sense that this present aim standard of rationality actually cover everything or covers everything. So anything goes, all right, as long as at that time you want to do this, that's what your aim is, that's what your objectives are, then it's fine. You're being rational. In a way, it explains everything, but in another way, it doesn't explain anything because, it doesn't really have any specific kind of understanding of what is rationality, right? So these are, two of the conventional perspectives of rationality. There may be more, but as I've said before, in most, standard economics book, we look at self-interest standard of rationality when we talk about the conventional perspective. Okay, so just real quick on what are the determinants of demand. I think also in the last week's lecture you talked about consumers and producers in general, the market. So when we talk about consumers, so we will be talking about demand. When we talk about producers, I think I'm not sure when would be the topic on production. It will concentrate more on the supply curve or function or whatever have you. Okay, so what are the determinants of demand for a particular good or a particular service? Okay, so first one would be, for instance, income. Okay, so of course, usually when you have more income, all right, you would want to demand more of the good. Okay, this applies to most of the goods. And this we refer to as normal goods. So if, for instance, if you have more income, you would demand, let's say, more clothing. If you have more income, you would demand more, let's say, leisure activities, recreational activities, and so on. Okay, but there are also other goods where when you have higher income, actually the demand for that particular good or service will actually be lower, right? So this we refer to in economics as inferior goods. So for instance, all right, it could be generic brand products. So when you have a lower income, you may demand more of these generic brand products. But if as your income, increases, then you would demand less of the generic brand products, and get more of the branded products. In a sense that the thinking is branded ones probably would be of higher quality. Okay, so maybe another example would be instant noodles. I put a question mark there because again, it depends. When we don't have much income, like I think for most of us when we were students before, we didn't really have a lot of money. So we consume a lot more of the instant noodles. So as you have higher income, right, then you would actually not, consume instant noodles, but perhaps, go for more better kind of food. All right. But of course, for some people, they may love instant noodles. So it's not an inferior good for them. Okay. Now, the other thing is, another determinant or factor of demand could be taste and preference. So from the conventional perspective also, all right, it does take into account, your emotions, like your envy or guilt or sympathy or love for certain good or certain services, or or your even you don't want your dislike for certain things. These things also affect demand. All right, and but the thing is, from the conventional perspective, all these are actually very subjective. Okay, so it can differ from one person to another, and it is really up to individuals, and it's really quite open. Now, of course, when we say it from the Islamic perspective too, individuals have taste and preference, but these taste and preference are guided, all right, by some principles, which we will discuss it a little bit later. Okay, I think just now I saw somebody having raised their hands, but I think the conduct of this lecture and all the other lectures, according to the administrators, is that if there is time, perhaps it will be at the end of this session, the lecture. Okay. Oh, by the way, because this consumption topic is for 2 sessions, I'm just combining these 2 sessions, and we'll just see if I need a break in between. I just let you know, but it's just combine these 2 sessions into one. Okay, so the second determinant, as we say, is taste or preference. And the third one, of course, would be the prices of not just the good, but the prices of the substitutes and complements. Okay, so other goods that will affect actually the demand of a particular good. So what do we mean by substitutes and complements? Complements are goods or services that are consumed together. All right. For instance, if for some people they consume coffee and sugar together, so if the price of sugar increases, for instance, it would affect the demand for coffee, because now they may reduce coffee because the price of sugar increases. So it affects in a way the price, in a sense, or the cost of consuming coffee. Right. In terms of substitute, it would be goods or services that are consumed, one place in of the other. So you can replace, one good with another. So again, I say coffee and tea. So if the price of coffee increases, then your demand of tea will increase, because now tea is relatively cheaper. Coffee becomes expensive. Okay, so this could be also a factor in affecting the demand of a particular good or service. Okay, then of course also expectations. about future income and price levels. So even though you have a certain level of income at the moment, if you expect that your income is going to go up in the future, you may actually increase the quantity demanded now, because in the next period in the future you're going to have higher income. Or conversely, if you know that your income is going to be affected or going to drop in the future, in the next period, for instance, then you may actually cut down on the demand for a certain goods or service. Okay. Same thing for price levels. Okay. So if you expect the price is going to increase, all right, in the future, so you would actually demand more now. Okay. So at one time in Malaysia, the price of a cooking oil, all right, is announced that is going to increase in a few days' time. So everybody will go and buy the cooking oil, now, rush to the stores to get. Or it can be the other way around too. So if you expect the price is going to decrease, in the future, then you will postpone, buying the product and actually, wait until, in the future. All right. So for instance, if we talk about iPhones and so on, so if you expect that the iPhone 14, for instance, the price is going to go down soon, so you would actually not buy it yet and perhaps just, wait until the price goes down if you expect it to go down. Okay. So, another determinant of demand is actually your religious beliefs, all right? So sometimes with the same level of income or with the same, expectation of prices of substitutes and complements and so on, and even perhaps taste and preference, if your belief is that the product is not good or should not be demanded, you will not do it, all right? You will not demand such goods. Or vice versa. If you believe that the goods is good, and all right, it helps you to be closer to your religion, then you would actually demand more of the good or the services. Okay, so there are of course other determinants of demand, but I'm just giving you the main ones that we usually talk about. All right. Now, with regards to law of demand, as I've mentioned before, I think in last week's lecture, you talk about, or we say that there is an inverse relationship between price and the demand, okay? Because from past observations, this is what happens. And so here is, we say that the curve is downward sloping. So there is a relationship between price here and quantity. So at higher prices, your demand is very low. At, low prices, your demand is high. Okay, so why is that the case? Because when the price of a good or service increases, then as we said before, people may not buy that good and switch to a close substitute. Okay, so therefore the demand will drop. Also, when the price increases, then you cannot buy as much as before, in the sense that your purchasing power decreases. All right, so you have to decrease your consumption and your demand. Okay, unless, all right, at the same time you reduce the demand and consumption of the other things, then you can still actually buy that product. But usually in general, you find that as price increases, all right, as price increases over here, your demand will go down. Okay, so this is the law of demand. All right, but when we talk about price of a product, as we said before, we actually are looking at the real price of product. At times we don't, we just look at what is in the price tag, but we need to make sure that when we look at the price of product, it is the price relative to the prices of other products as well. Okay, so here we talk about consumer preferences. Okay, so from the conventional perspective, right, in general, more is better. Okay, so given other things equal, okay, more of a good is always preferred to less. Okay, so And when we talk about, consumer preferences also, there is, this thing that we need to consider, the time preference, okay? Whether we will want to have it now, or we want to postpone it, or we want to stagger, our consumption and so on. So there are many factors that, account to differences in time preference, all right, among individuals. So number one, the uncertainty regarding the future, okay? So if we're not certain about, what's going to happen in the future, so sometimes people say, they prefer current to future consumption. So let's just, consume now because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So usually people would prefer, current consumption to future consumption. Secondly is, the disposition of the individual, all right? So different people have different disposition. Some people, would, postpone certain goods, consumption of or demand of certain goods and services. Some people would, prefer to have it now, for instance. So again, it depends on the individuals. So just some, an example is, if we look at, if we have food on our plate, all right, so we like for Malaysians, usually we have rice and some chicken or beef, or and vegetables and stuff like that. So some people, all right, they may first take the most favorite food on their plate first, and take that one first, and then eat the rest later after that. But for some other people, they would keep the best parts the last. So again, it depends on the individuals. Okay. So also, the time preference, okay, also depends on the specific circumstances of the choice at hand. All right. So what was happening at that time will actually affect whether you prefer to have current consumption or postpone it to future consumption. Okay, so an example would be, if for instance, if you go to a supermarket and if you're hungry, all right, and usually people say that's the worst time to go shopping when you're hungry, because you tend to actually, want to buy more things, all right? But if you are not hungry, so your, what you buy or what you demand and what you consume may not be the same, all right? Or at times, you may, for instance, already, let's say, pay a deposit for something, right? So then you have a choice whether, suppose you pay a deposit of, let's say, 100 ringgit for a certain thing. And then when the time comes, you have actually two choices, whether to go with the one that you paid deposit and pay an additional, let's say, 500 ringgit, or you have another choice, which is also at 500 ringgit. So for many people, they may choose the one that, where they already paid the deposit, because that, they already put in, I shouldn't say maybe deposit, I mean something that you put where if you decide not to do it, you will, actually forfeit that deposit. So, in fact, because some people feel that you already put some money into it, so you may not want to, forfeit that choice and actually, not choose the other alternative, which perhaps may be better, maybe, okay? So now, again, as we said before, when we talk about, time preference, because current consumption opportunities, you can actually see it, all right? It confronts you directly. The future ones, you can only imagine. So sometimes people would prefer to actually have current consumption rather than future consumption. Okay, so when we look at the conventional versus the Islamic perspective of your time horizon, because the time horizon would affect your preferences. Okay, so it depends on actually how we view the reward or benefit that can be obtained in the current period versus what we can in the future period. Okay, so in a sense that when we talk about the Islamic perspective, our time horizon is not just in this world, but also in the hereafter. So the choices that we make, all right, not only depends on what's going to happen to us in this world, but rather what's, and more importantly, in a sense, what is going to happen to us in the hereafter. So the conventional and Islamic perspective, differ greatly in terms of this kind of understanding, and also it depends on the level of faith and conviction of individuals. So of course, Muslims, they vary in terms of the level of faith and conviction. So the higher the faith, or the more convicted you are, so your view of your time horizon and preference may not be the same. Okay. Now, so when we talk about time preference, also a related issue is what we call the self-control pitfall. It's very difficult to have self-control, especially when you have to wait, right? You postpone your consumption. So people have difficulty in carrying out plans that they believe to be actually in their own interest, because when the time comes, it's very difficult. So there needs to be what we call a commitment device, a device where it commits the person to behave in a certain way in the future, even though he may wish to behave otherwise when the time comes. Okay, so in Islam, actually, this is not something which is in a way difficult, because we will always be constantly reminded of the teachings of Islam. Okay, and if we believe that the reward comes from Allah, and so we're always looking at the benefits as the rewards that can be obtained from Allah. So in a way, this is going to be our self-control, our commitment device, right? Okay, so what would be the objective or goal of a consumer from the conventional perspective? The goal of a consumer is to get, the highest satisfaction. So in economics, we say that this is the utility, all right? This is the utility that we get, which is, subjective from one individual to another, that we get from a purchase of something, right? So sometimes we also refer to the happiness that you get. So when you purchase something, what you want is the highest satisfaction. So your choice of your, what to purchase, what not to purchase, is the one that gives you the highest utility. Okay, so utility is actually in the mind of the consumer, and the consumers can change their minds. All right, so from the conventional perspective, this happiness, this satisfaction, and so on, is actually very subjective, and it depends on their taste and their circumstances. But when their taste change, their circumstances change, then the consumption patterns can also change. So it can be anything. It is up to the individuals. All right. So utility is a property of a good or service that enables to satisfy the wants of a human being and probably the needs. All right. So because actually we need to put priority on the needs. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more on this. Okay. So from the conventional perspective, the consumer choice is actually, how the consumer determines which good and service to purchase and in what quantities to maximize utility or satisfaction or happiness, all right, given his budget constraint. So he has a constraint, all right, because he has a certain amount of income, and he is also constrained by the prices of the goods and services. Okay, so this would be, from the conventional perspective, the typical, consumer choice as given in, the textbooks in microeconomics would be this. Okay, so given the taste of the consumer, the rational consumer would want to maximize the utility or satisfaction received in spending his or her income. Okay, so in this case, all right, if we look at it from this perspective, we say that the consumer is never saturated with a commodity and would always prefer more to less. Okay, so if this is the case, that particular commodity we refer to as economic good, or in in general, we call it a good, all right? So a good is something that, where a consumer would want more of it rather than less, okay? There is also the opposite of it, all right, which is referred to as economic bad or just bad, all right, where it is something which less is preferred to more, okay? So example would be, for instance, pollution or garbage or refuse, okay? So people would prefer less pollution to more. So this is what is referred to as economic bad, okay? Now, the thing is, in terms of what is considered as a good or what is considered as a bad, all right, is actually all very subjective from the conventional perspective, and it is up to the individuals, all right, the respective individuals. If, as long as it is consistent with their preferences, then it is considered to be rational, all right? So this is the issue when we look at from the conventional perspective, because it is actually really up to the individual, and they can have their own preferences and tastes and values, all right? So anything goes, all right? And whatever it is, as long as the decisions that they make are consistent with their preferences, their taste, then it's fine, all right? They are actually behaving rationally, okay? So Herbert Simon actually give an alternative to this objective of utility maximization. Before we say that in conventional economics, people want to maximize their utility or satisfaction or happiness, okay? But Herbert Simon says that actually in reality, people rarely optimize, okay? What they actually do is actually satisficing, okay? So what they do is they choose an outcome which is considered to be satisfactory to them, or rather than the optimal. And then what they do is they find an option that reaches that standard of being, satisfactory. So instead of maximizing utility, what they do is they satisfy, okay? So in other words, they identify an option that is good enough rather than continuing to search for the ideal, okay? So satisfies is to actually choose an outcome that would be satisfactory and then seek an option that at least reaches the standard, okay? All right. So now we're going to focus more on consumption and consumer behavior from the Islamic perspective, okay? So when we look at the role of individual, all right, as I'm sure, as I said before, you have heard of this before in the earlier lectures, an individual is actually a servant of God, all right? And he or she is also a vicegerent on the earth, all right? So as a vicegerent, as a Khalifa, he is entrusted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to use whatever is available, the nature, the universe, and other creations, all right? While being a servant means that the person does not have any independent authority or absolute rights other than to follow the will of Allah, right? So you're entrusted by Allah with whatever is, available, but you must, it's not that you can do whatever you want with it, all right? You have to make sure you do it by following what is already prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? So we have to make sure that these roles have to be lived simultaneously. You cannot neglect one from the other. So being a vicegerent, you have a responsibility, and being a servant of Allah, you have to make sure you abide by what has been prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sole owner of all his creations, and the individual is only a trustee to handle it in ways that are pleasing to him. Okay, So this you can refer to verses in the Al-Quran, in Al-Baqarah, verse 30, as well as in Surah 57, verse 7, all right, among others. So what is the objective of an individual in an Islamic society, given that these are the roles of the individual? All right, so again, I'm sure you have heard of this before, all right, is to achieve the well-being. What is well-being? Is falah, or success in this world and in the hereafter, and the approval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all right? Mardatillah. All right. So this is what, for anything that we do, all right, we want to achieve well-being or falah, all right, or success, and to get the approval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as we said before, this is the Islamic worldview, all right? So it is the driving force underlying all actions for an Islamic individual, including, how we behave in our consumption. Okay, so in that sense, the concept of rationality in relation to human behavior would pertain to an individual acting wisely and choosing the best means and alternatives to advance this goal, right? To get the approval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for an Islamic consumer, being rational is to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by having his consumption behavior in accordance with what has been instructed in the Quran and in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So it differs quite a bit from the conventional perspective where, anything goes essentially, all right? Being rational, because it depends on the individual taste and preference, right? And there is no specific goals as compared to for an Islamic consumer. Okay, so let's talk about spending, all right? So when we talk about spending in Islam, all right, nature is seen as a bounty from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to utilize it in the best possible way. So whatever is given by Allah, we have to make sure that we use it in the best possible way. As we said before, the absolute ownership belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in Islam, we recognize the ownership rights for the individuals as well as for the society. Okay, so private property and wealth is bestowed upon individuals, is given upon individuals as a trust. Remember, we are vicegerents, and so it involves obligations not just to ourselves, but also to others. So therefore, how you utilize, the wealth and property that is given by Allah to us must be along the principles that have been prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so I'll go over a general guidelines, all right, for this. So, spending is actually good because it is actually an ibadah, all right? You should spend. You cannot just keep, your property or your wealth or your money. You have to spend, all right? You should spend because this is an act of worship and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you spend, and this is very important, within the tenets of Islam, all right, which includes spending on the poor and the needy, then you will achieve great rewards. And remember, because what do we want? We want to get the pleasure of Allah. We want to achieve, falah, all right, well-being. So spending in the right way will actually make us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can refer to verses in the Al-Quran, like in Surah 36, verse 47, Al-Baqarah, verse 261, and so on, all right? Surah 7, ayat verse 32, and Surah 28, verse 77. Okay, so what would be the objective of an Islamic consumer? Okay, so the objective of an Islamic consumer is maximization of well-being of Allah, by seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, through the submission of his will and the pursuit of means and ends that would please him in his consumption behavior. Okay, so this is, the comparison between Islamic economics and conventional economics. Okay, let me just take a sip of water. Okay, so for Islamic economics, as we said before, we're looking at consumers' well-being is falah or happiness, all right, by utilizing wealth to fulfill the consumption needs of the consumer and his dependents and the poor, and guided by the principles prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to get the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For, from the conventional perspective, in conventional economics, we look at consumers' utility, and this is the pleasure or satisfaction that is obtained from consumption of goods and services, guided by the consumer's own preferences and tastes, which are derived from his own values and judgment. All right. So if his values and judgments are consistent with the Islamic ones, very good. But it can also not be the same. All right. So we have that. So the determination of the level of utility for a consumer in conventional economics, as we said before, is based purely on self-interest and focus on the pursuit of material progress. All right, so this is what we mentioned before, a very narrow sense perspective, looking at focusing on material progress. So the economic satisfaction that is derived by the individual is defined from and also does not extend beyond his own individual judgment and values. Okay, and the thing is, each consumer can have different sets of preferences and values and will have his own definition of what constitutes happiness, pleasure, or satisfaction, right? So the thing is, as we said before, all consumers will pursue their own goal and objectives, and it not necessary and most likely will not be the same. But, they are being rational, right? But for Islamic consumers, our choices will be expected to be the same and consistent with each other, regardless of the situation or the time. Okay, and because we share the same goals and objectives, and we abide by the universal principles to guide our behavior in consumption. So rational behavior from the conventional perspective, all right, can mean that the same individual can make actually different choices under different circumstances or time, because the preferences and values may change in different situations or time. And, rational behavior also means that choices will vary greatly among individuals, as different persons can have different goals and objectives. Okay, but Islamic consumers will share a general common ultimate goal and objective. Okay, so I'm just putting this word general because we are not going to the specific details. Of course, it may vary if we are along, the tenets of Islam. There's no problem, but we share a general common ultimate goal and objective. Okay, so for an Islamic consumer, we will allocate our wealth and resources accordingly to maximize well-being. Okay, and this can be achieved. Okay, how do we want to maximize well-being? This can be achieved by protecting, improving, and promoting the 5 basic elements of the existence of human being. All right, in this world and at both the individual and collective levels. This is what we refer to as the Maqasid al-Sharia. And again, I'm sure you have, heard of this, or, some of the previous lectures have gone over this, but let's try and put it in the context of consumption and consumer behavior, right? So these are the five dimensions or elements: life, faith, religion, intellect or mind, al-aqal, posterity, offspring, an-nasl, and property or wealth, al-mal. All right. So if we protect, improve, and promote these 5 elements, then we will be able to maximize well-being. Okay, so as we say, these are the objectives or the higher objectives of the Sharia or the Maqasid al-Sharia. And as I said, you have seen this before. So when we talk about life, all right, it is the fulfillment of basic needs. And when we talk about deen, to preserve, the belief, our belief system. And we talk about al-aqal, okay, to make sure that we acquire and utilize knowledge, and to make sure that we safeguard ourselves from the negative influences such as drugs, superstitions, and so on. And then we have the posterity, all right, to make sure that the survival and the progress of the family. So making sure that their needs are taken care of, right? And also al-mal, all right, this is to make sure that we are accountable of the resources that have been bestowed upon us. So if you look at these 5 aspects, when we decide on decisions about consumption and our consumer behavior, we have to take into account all these 5 elements, okay? And so the guidelines that I'm going to present would be along these lines, all right? Making sure that we are able to promote, improve, and protect, all right? These 5 basic maqasid al-Sharia. Okay, so let's talk about what are the guiding principles related to consumption and the utilization of wealth. Okay, so the first one is moderation in spending. All right, this is something which is already very common. You hear, in Islam, we have to be, we have to practice moderation. Okay, so we have to make sure that when we spend, all right, it has to be along the making sure we spend it moderately. Okay, so what it means that we should avoid extravagance, we should avoid wastefulness, and also we should avoid niggardliness. Okay, so after this, I will go a little bit deeper into each of these things. Secondly, is the second principle is to prioritize our utilization of wealth. Okay, so how should we utilize it? First of all, we have to make sure that we fulfill our own and dependence needs. Okay, so don't, the focus, the first priority is first on ourselves and our dependence needs. When we're done with that, then we can look at spending on the poor relatives, our poor relatives. And then, if we're done with that, then we can give charity and to make sure that we save, all right, for future needs. Then the third guiding principle would be making sure that, we consume items that are permissible and avoid those that are prohibited from consumption. Okay. And the fourth one is we need to prioritize our consumption, which one we must give precedence to. Okay, so we have to make sure that we fulfill our basic necessities, basic needs first before we go on to spending on other things. So let's talk about the first principle. The first principle, as we said, moderation, and we shouldn't be extravagant. We shouldn't be a miser or be a niggard, nor should we be wasteful or tabzir. Okay, so moderation is considered as the golden mean between the two extremes of miserliness and extravagance. So you refer to a lot in the Quran, all right? So example in Surah 25, verse 67, or Surah 7, verse 31, and so on, all right? So a lot of the verses in the Quran, Allah has talked about, this moderation. We have to be moderation in this, particularly in our consumption. Okay, so in other words, consumers should not be spending more than they need. But they also should not be miserly by not spending enough on their needs. Okay, so we have to make sure that we are in this range of moderation. So to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to please Him is to spend on the wealth that is bestowed, as what we said before. But we should not go over, trespass the limits of moderation, to make sure that we ensure justice in consumption, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to spend, but forbids extravagance. Okay, so consumers should not spend more than they can afford, nor should they be stingy and miserly by not spending enough on themselves or others. All right, so because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses those who do not spend or give the ones that his bounty. Okay, so being a miser actually, all right, not spending enough will actually bring harm to the person in their religion, okay, and also in their worldly affairs. Because why? We are not being grateful for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favor, right? So those people who are stingy, actually they are being stingy to themselves, because they would reduce the rewards that they get by spending. So if you get the displeasure of Allah and you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, then you are actually not doing good to yourself. Right? So we should spend, but making sure that we follow this principle of moderation. Okay, so miserliness can be viewed as actually withholding resources from being properly utilized. Right? So continuing on this principle, when we talk about moderation, then you may ask, okay, so what is a moderate level? Okay, actually, there's no particular level of quantity. I cannot tell you, okay, for food you have to spend only this much. The level is from here, this level, this much to this much. There's no such thing as that. I mean, the thing is because it is, depends on the situations that you're in terms of, as we said before, all right, every Islamic consumer may have different moderate level of consumption. It depends on their socioeconomic environment the individual is in, and also the society that they're in, all right? Different societies may have different norms, a different way of living. Your socioeconomic level also will determine what is considered as moderate or not, all right? So, but if you follow, the general guidelines, then it should be okay, all right? Again, one of the things, when I have to present this before I start preparing this, and I was like, I am not a fiqh person, so if you have any questions about the Sharia rulings and so on, I will not be able to address it, but you can have, you can post your questions, and I can refer to my colleagues who are experts in this, and hopefully that if you do have any questions regarding that, I will try and help out in that sense. Okay, so as we said before, when we talk about moderation, there is no particular level. All right. Again, it depends on your situation. But as long as the threshold limits, the lower and upper limits have not been reached, so within that range, all right, you should spend and consume. All right. So if you are within that range, as long as when you increase the consumption of the goods and services, actually you will be increasing your well-being. Okay. Then again on this, the first principle, right? So for instance, if you have the means to have a spacious house, or you have a means to have a comfortable means of transportation and wear expensive clothes, that's fine, all right? But don't go beyond that, all right? It is considered as israf or extravagance if you spend a large portion of your wealth on a huge mansion, for instance, or purchase a car worth millions of ringgit, or lavish on expensive clothes and jewelry, all right? So in the sense that your spending is already beyond the acceptable moderate level of the society that you live in. So what is considered, a huge mansion may be different from one society to another, but it has to be, within that particular society, or within, the particular socioeconomic level. Okay, so a consumer can also be extravagant. You can actually be considered to be extravagant in charity, right? Spending too much in charity. Okay, when would this happen? When you spend so much, on the cost, but you neglect the other responsibilities. All right. So spending a lot on charity is no problem. But you have, as long as you already have fulfilled your other responsibilities. But if you neglect that, all right, but you focus too much on charity, then you can be considered as being extravagant in charity. Okay. So we look at the other side of it. Okay, if you have the means, all right, to purchase, buy something, but instead you choose to live in a very small house. You choose to buy a very small car, much to the discomfort of your dependents, then you will be considered as a miser, right? So of course, if you don't have the means, that's fine. But if you have the means and if you can live comfortably, then you should spend and make sure that you and your dependents are comfortable. Okay. So also, you can be considered to be miserly if you choose to spend on cheap, unwholesome food to yourself or to your family or dependents, instead of actually spending on more nutritious food. It can be more costly, but if you have the means, you should. All right. So you should, of course, spend within your means. Okay. So a consumer also is considered as a miser if he has the means and he has already attended to all his responsibilities. If he gives very little or does not give at all to charity when he can actually afford to do so. All right. So, so just within these guidelines, then you can see, whether you are being moderate or you're being extravagant or you are being miserly. Okay. So now, of course, a related concept to extravagance is tabzir, wastefulness. All right, they're not the same, but they're related. So in the Quran, all right, it is Allah has labeled those who are doing this, all right, are brothers of the Shaytan. All right, this is given in Al-Quran in Surah 17, verses 26 to 27. Right? So tabzir is being wasteful, right? So if you're being wasteful, you're actually being ungrateful for what Allah has given to you. And you are shirking your duties as a vicegerent, the Khalifa, because you are trusted of this bounty and you have to make sure that you use it or not, and not being wasteful. Okay. So extravagance is, excessiveness, but wastefulness, all right, can occur two ways, all right, where you spend on items which are actually not permissible in Islam, and you waste your money on those things, all right? So this can be considered as tabzir, okay? So, and it's wasteful, it is inappropriate, it is foolish, and it is wrongful or corrupt or useless, okay? Another, so an example would be, you spend on gambling or drinking, all right? So even though the amount is not significant, you're not being extravagant, you're not being excessive, but even if you just spend on any of these, you are actually being wasteful, because these are the items that are prohibited in Islam, all right? But another way, as we said before, you can spend, excessively on permitted items, and, for instance, food, but they are left uneaten, all right? So it is tabzir, it is wasteful. Or for instance, our everyday lives, we leave the lights on in an empty room, all right? Or the AC on in our office when we are not even in our office. When we can switch it off, then we should, because we are being wasteful. All right. And also, for instance, if you have a faucet with water running, okay, and nobody's using it, sometimes when we go to the masjid and so on, you see sometimes the faucet, where the water is running and so on. So these are, examples of tabzir. Okay. So tabzir is like, you spoil or destroy wealth. Okay. So, in Islam, all right, consumers are exhorted, encouraged to be moderate in their spending. Whereas, in contrast, if we look at it from the conventional perspective, the consumer does not follow these principles of moderation. In fact, if you recall that, you can get higher utility if, or satisfaction or happiness, more is better. Consuming a higher level of goods and services, you will get higher utility or happiness or satisfaction from the conventional perspective. Okay, but in Islam, we have to make sure that we practice moderation. Okay, as we said before, there is no explicit measurement or determination of moderation, but anything, and what is considered as extravagance or miserly or stinginess, but we have to make sure that, we just follow the general guiding principles. Okay, so if again, the preferences of the consumer are towards things which are harmful or useless, then from the Islamic perspective, but from the conventional perspective, it's okay. He can choose to consume these items because it will bring utility or satisfaction to him, right? So it differs, from how we see, things, all right? So if we follow this principle of moderation, this would be the general expected outcomes, all right? If we moderation and avoidance of wastefulness, then the society will have less a problem of illegal and harmful activities, such as corruption and gambling, all right? Because this is considered as tabzir, and individuals are self-motivated to avoid such practices as it is in the best interest to do so, okay? If we shun extravagance, then, we expect that we should have a more peaceful society, as there's less feelings of resentment, jealousy, envy, all right? And because you don't really see individuals who live, ostentatiously compared to others, okay? And if we avoid miserliness, then the needs of the family, relatives, and the public at large are satisfied to a certain extent, of course, all right? We also need, help in general from, the society, not just from the individuals helping, their families and relatives. And because of this, it will bring goodwill among the members of the society, and it will help to reduce hostility and disunity, right? So we expect these outcomes. Now, for the second principle, all right, the prioritization in the utilization of wealth, all right, as we said before, wealth is given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we have to do it or use it in the correct way, okay? So we must make sure that there are priorities to spending, and because we are the vicegerent or Khalifah, okay, on this earth. So how do we do it? First of all, we have to spend on ourselves and our dependents, all right? We can refer to the hadith, all right, given as there, all right? And making sure that we have to make sure that these needs have to be satisfied first, all right? Before wealth can be spent for other purposes. The first priority is on ourselves and our dependents, okay? Then also making sure that when we spend, we have to make sure that our needs are satisfied, but we must observe the principle of moderation. So we cannot just spend and spend and spend on ourselves and dependents, but as long as our needs are satisfied and we practice this principle of moderation, then that will be fine. All right. So after these are done, then we need to look at our relatives, all right, not on other people. All right, not that people that we don't know, right, or our friends. We have to look at our relatives first. So relatives who are poor and needy, we need to then cater to their needs, okay? Because Islam exhorts individuals to give charity to relatives who are in need, as it is considered as both sadaqah, all right, and also to keep and strengthen the family relationship. Okay. So relatives have more rights than anyone else to one's charity. Okay, so focus on yourself and your dependents, and then on your relatives. Okay, so you can refer to verses in the Al-Quran, Al-Baqarah, verse 177, Surah 4, verse 36, as well as in the Hadith, right, as given there. Okay, continuing on these guiding principles. So after that, all right, what do we do? Once we spend on ourselves and our dependents and our relatives, then of course, we have to focus on other people, charity to other than relatives, okay? So they include orphans, neighbors, the poor and the needy, because again, they have the right to our wealth, the wealth that's given, bestowed upon us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. So again, you can refer to verses in the Al-Quran as I have given here. And also, all right, along with charity, we have to save money. All right. If we have, we can afford to do that. As these times, we find that a lot of people are not in a good financial situation. But if we can afford to do so. And especially, if you think this is a lesson for us, in good times when we actually have the means, we should save, so that in times like this, for many people, with the pandemic and the economic aftermath of it, we find that people are in a very bad financial situation. For some, because they did not save. All right. Of course, for others, they are just not, having the financial means to do so. But if we have, then we should make sure that we save, because especially for people with families and other responsibilities. Okay. So saving will ensure that the consumer and the dependents are financially secure to meet their future needs. Okay. And because, if we die, for instance, the livelihood of our dependents are in jeopardy if there is no savings. Right? So of course, you have to pay zakat. All right? If you have reached the nisab, you have to pay zakat, because this is an obligatory alms. All right? We have to do this to make sure that, the distribution of wealth to everyone. Okay, so on top of zakat, of course, your sadaqah, your charity. Okay, so again, you can refer to verses in the Al-Quran as well as hadith, on this matter. Okay, all right. So continuing on this guiding principle, so we find that as Muslims, as we said before, all right, I emphasize this a lot. Wealth is taken as a trust given to us by Allah, and we have to make sure that we spend, not just on ourselves, but also on the poor and the needy. Okay, so we have to understand that the latter actually has a right to the wealth. All right, and it's not whether we want to do it or we don't want to do it. It is their right to the wealth that is bestowed upon us by Allah. All right, so we have to make sure that we transfer this wealth to those in need. All right, and to give zakat. Okay, so I have to hurry up a little bit. All right, and so what would be the expected outcomes? The distribution of wealth, would be done in a more voluntary way in an Islamic society compared to a society where there is no such principle. Okay, and in a sense that there would be less necessity to have government regulations. We have to have it, all right, but with the way that even from at individual levels we have it, so there would be a less necessity to have government regulations. And also, we don't need to be asked or forced to do it, because we know, if we want to have well-being and seek the pleasure of Allah, we will do it voluntarily. Okay, so again, we have this. All right, so I need to hurry up a little bit, I think, because I have about probably 15 minutes left. Okay, all right. So the third principle is that we have to make sure we consume, goods that have the characteristics of being tayyibat. All right, so it must be clean, wholesome, and pure. All right. And it must be useful and beneficial for consumption, because it will bring material, moral, and spiritual betterment to the consumer. All right, so anything that does not have any goodness will not be considered as a good. All right, so if it is impure, worthless, does not bring any goodness, it is not considered as a good. So this is as opposed to how the conventional economics look at good. Anything that anybody prefer more to less is already considered as a good, and it has a value. People are willing to pay for it. That's considered as a good. All right. So, but in Islam, all right, if something is impure or worthless, then it is not considered as a good, right? Okay, so as we said before, one of the maqasid al-sharia is, the preservation, protection of al-aqal, all right? So anything which can bring harm to human beings, all right, their mind will be, prohibited, all right? So alcoholic beverage, okay, although there's a market for it, all right, people would want to buy it, all right, but in Islam, this is not, this will be prohibited, okay? So as we said before, from the conventional perspective, all right, as long as you have the economic utility, then no problem, all right? This would be considered as goods, all right? Good as opposed to bad. Okay, so if we use this principle, we expect that society will comprise of individuals who are physically, morally, and socially healthy. Okay, so the fourth principle, all right, in terms of the prioritization in consumption, all right. So of course, when we want to spend on our self-dependence or the poor relatives or even in charity, we have to make sure that we must fulfill the basic necessities first, the daruriyat, because it represents the minimum level of goods and services that every individual must achieve. Okay, so the daruriyat, all right, would be all activities and goods that are essential to the preservation of the foundations of good individual and collective life, all right, to achieve the maqasid al-sharia. So once this is done, all right, then you can spend on hajiyat, or what we call conveniences, okay? And then what are these items? Things that are not vital, to the preservation of the 5 elements, but it would relieve or remove impediments and difficulties in life, okay? So once this is done, then you can spend on tahsiniyat, all right? So what are they? They are refinements, embellishments, or luxuries, okay? So this goes beyond the limit of conveniences. It helps to brighten, complement, and adorn our lives, okay? So just some examples, just to give you some idea what is meant by daruriyat, hajiyat, and tahsiniyat. So for daruriyat, we have to make sure that we fulfill the basic necessities, all right? So you have, making sure that you have good food, all right? We have to make sure that we have shelter, all right? Housing and shelter. We need to have the basic necessity of transportation, of education, as well as healthcare, all right? Then once these are fulfilled, all right, for ourselves, our dependents, and and if we want to give for our relatives and other people, making sure that these are fulfilled. And then if then once you can go to conveniences, all right, maybe you want to have having coffee outside, in a restaurant, or buying nice clothes and shoes and bags, having a nicer house, having a more comfortable car, all right? Then, if you can afford, you can go and, buy a nicer car, eat nicer food, go for fine dining, have a nicer house, and go traveling, all right? For instance, so this would be some examples. Of course, I'm just giving you an example. Okay. Now, making sure if we do this, all right, then the needs of the individuals will be effectively achieved. And if you set this priority, then you don't forsake the the more essential things in our lives. Okay. Now, before I go to looking at some empirical analysis, there's this in Hirsch in 1976 talk about positional good or status good. All right. So these goods, is like a status symbol. all right? So gold or diamond or real estate and luxury goods, all right? So people buy this, all right, because to those people, it gives you certain status because other people cannot possess them, or there's limited number of people who have it. So it gives, you know, a feel good kind of a feeling when you have this, all right? So the issue is this, you know, when you focus a lot on getting positional goods or status goods, then you feel that, you know, spending on this appears the benefits that you get or the payoff you get, you know, to you, to some people is very large, while saving and spending on more important things appear to be very small. So this is actually contrary to Islamic teachings, okay? So maybe, okay, I'll just spend just a few minutes on just a summary of what we have talked about. So when we look at the role of individual in Islamic perspective, we say that, oops, sorry about that. All right, the role of individual is a servant and Khalifa of Allah, and we must be accountable for it, for that. All right, and but from the conventional perspective, it is taken as, you know, the individual's own and only accountable to himself. And being rational from the Islamic perspective is to use the wealth to derive the highest level of well-being, but from the conventional perspective is to reach the highest economic utility. The objective of the consumer is to maximize well-being, meaning the pleasure of Allah, but from the conventional perspective is to maximize utility, subject, you know, to the budget constraint, but it is up to the individuals themselves. The responsibility of the individual from the Islamic perspective is on the individual, on the society, and there's also a moral responsibility. In the conventional perspective, is just the individual, and spending, you know, is to make sure that we fulfill our role as the Khalifa or vice children of Allah, and it is seen as an act of worship. All right, but from the conventional perspective, it's just to fulfill the consumer needs and wants. All right, it is an end in itself. The guiding principles, from the Islamic perspective, it is already set upon by Allah, but from the conventional perspective, it is up to the individuals. Okay, and in terms of the amount of or level of consumption, we have to practice moderation. And for conventional perspective, more is better. Okay. What is the characteristic of a good? Okay, it must be good, it must be pure, it must be clean and wholesome. But in conventional perspective, there is no any specific characteristics. The definition of good, it must be useful and beneficial, all right? But from the conventional perspective, anything that has economic utility that can be exchanged in the market, there's no problem, all right? And a definition of bad from the Islamic perspective, it brings harm and detrimental to health, mind, and well-being. But you know, in conventional perspective, as if it has economic disutility, there is a negative value, then it is considered as a bad. Okay. And then the priority to spending, as what we have said before, and the consumption of goods and savings. Okay. All right, so let's just spend, I guess, the last 7 minutes or so on the empirical findings, okay? So I use the data that actually you can have access to it, right? This is the latest one, the World Value Survey. This is coming from 59 countries, comprising of over 87,000 respondents, okay? So first of all, it's just looking at, you know, one of the things that we said before was income is one of the determinants of demand. Higher income, you will demand more. If you demand more, then you will get, you know, higher happiness or satisfaction, all right, or higher utility. So again, from the Islamic perspective or conventional perspective, it depends on, you know, how you consume, whether you are abiding by the principles prescribed by Allah or not. But the point here is, if you have higher income, you have the means to demand more and consume more, all right? So from here, right, I base it on these 3 questions, question 49, 46, and question 288 from the World Value Survey. All things considered, how satisfied are you with your life? So looking at satisfaction. This one is looking at level of happiness. and this one looking at income. All right, so we just want to look at how income relates to the happiness and satisfaction. And in the survey, all right, they asked the individuals which religious denominations they belong to. All right, so there's 10 categories. Do not belong to any, or Roman Catholic or Protestant, Orthodox, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, other Christians, and other denominations. Okay, so the first one is just to show you that, with higher income, all right, you have higher satisfaction. Okay, this is no problem. This is for all denominations. All right, you have this happiness also, but except for Hindu. For Hindu, there is no relationship between happiness and income. All right, so this is fine, because we say that you have higher income, you spend more, either from the conventional perspective or Islamic perspective, then you will get higher satisfaction or well-being or happiness or utility. Okay, now what we want to look at now is looking at the conventional perspective of rationality. If we look at the self-interest standard of rationality, we say that rational people will put most weight on what the cost and the benefits that accrue to themselves only, and they don't really care about making other people happy or trying to do the right things and so on. Okay, so they focus on themselves only, and so, but in Islam is the opposite. So I'm looking at these three questions in the survey, question 177, 178, and 180, whether they think that these actions are always justified, never justified, or something in between. So this is on a scale of 1 to 10. All right, 1 is never justified, 10 is always justified. So if people who are who abide by this self-interest standard of rationality, then they would be more likely to say that it is justified because it is of benefit to them. All right, they are not. It is of benefit to them, and they are not trying to do the right things, and so on. Okay, so what we have done, or what I have done, is just to look at these three questions and look for each group of respondents. All right, based on their religious denominations, and see what happens. Okay, so also, all right, here. There's a question on how important is God in your life. So I'm using the answer to this question in terms of a general proxy of their level of faith, all right, in their religion. So the higher the score is, meaning the more importance is God in their life, and therefore as a proxy of their level of faith. All right, and abiding to their religious beliefs. Okay, so for the first statement, looking at claiming government benefits to which you are not entitled, we find that for people in these religious denominations, the more important the God is to them, the more they're saying it is justified. All right, so in other words, this is perfectly, or looking at, this is consistent with the conventional perspective of rationality, meaning, it's separate. God is God. I mean, in terms of how important God is, but what I want to do is what is of benefits to me. So we find that people who do not belong to any denomination, or the Roman Catholics, or the Buddhists, and other Christians, and others in the others category, there is actually a positive relationship between this claiming government benefits to which you are justified and the importance of God. While here there is no relationship for Protestant, Jew, and Hindu, but for people who are Orthodox and Muslims, we find that the more important God is, the less is the they feel that they should be doing this, right? So we find that in terms of whether their thinking and behavior, whether more consistent with the conventional perspective or Islamic perspective, it depends on what kind of religion and their level of faith in their religion. Okay, So similarly, if we look at avoiding a fare on public transport, we also find again people who do not belong to any denomination, Roman Catholic, Buddhist, and other Christians and others. All right, there's a positive relationship, more consistent with the conventional perspective of rationality. For Jew, importance of God, nothing to do with how they conduct their life or what they think should matter. But for Islam and Protestant and Orthodox and Hindu, all right, there is a negative relationship, all right, between the two. Okay, similarly on whether they cheating on taxes if they have a chance, all right. So we find that again, all right, for Islam, all right, and for some others like Roman Catholic, Protestant, and so on, we find that the more important God is in their life, in other words, as a proxy of their level of faith, all right, the less is it justified to actually cheat on taxes. So they would be, not wanting to do this. Okay, all right. So basically, the summary of the findings is, individuals who do not belong to any denomination, their thinking and behavior is consistent to the conventional perspective of rationality, of self-interest. For Jews, all right, the importance of God does not have any significant impact on their thinking and behavior, in particular to these three things that we have. But for Muslims and Orthodox Christians, importance of God has a significant effect on their thinking and behavior, and this is definitely contrary to the conventional perspective of rationality and more consistent with how, what Islam has prescribed. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation. Okay, Alhamdulillah, I have managed to keep it to until 10:30. All right, Assalamualaikum.
Right, thank you so much, Prof, for the excellent and also detailed lecture. It helps us to understand ourselves better. So, how do we make decision, and also our behavior as a consumer, and also guidance from the Islamic perspective. It also reminds me of one of Dr. Aslam Akbar's lecture that we have to spend, but not too much and not too less. Most importantly, we need to keep our intention right and make sure that our consumption is guided by the Sharia principle. And Prof, thank you also for reminding us that not to go shopping when hungry, for a better consumption decision. Okay, eat first and then go shopping.
Remind myself that.
All right, so let's take some question from the floor. Around 15 minutes. Let's see how many questions we can take. All right, we have one question in our YouTube live, but I think that one is more on Islamic ruling, which I think Prof had said that we should direct that kind of question to the expert. Maybe that question in the YouTube live, maybe that one can be directed to Dr. Aslam Akbar or Prof Mustafa Muhammad, inshallah. Right? So question for Prof Selamah from Zoom. Right? How to calculate or identify external costs?
Okay, as we said before, we don't, when we make decisions, we don't explicitly calculate, in numbers and so on, but we have to take into account, the impact of our decision on others. All right. Sometimes we don't know. All right. Sometimes it's more of common sense. Okay. When we do certain things, we know that it will affect others. So what we need to do is first consider the things that we know. As I said before, when we talk about external costs, there's also actually external benefit. Sometimes we look at things a lot in a very negative way, all right? But there's also external benefits to other people, because sometimes when we do good, for instance, people may be encouraged, by our action, and we'll also do that. But of course, sometimes we don't know. But again, of course, our niyah must be correct. Our intention must be correct. So back to the question on, how do we, what would be the external cost? I think first of all, we need to, think a little bit on, what would be the cost of doing certain things. Some of the things that we do are quite personal and private, in a sense that you know it won't affect other people, right? But there are other things where we know that it does affect other people. You know, the example of, let's say, you create pollution, or even, when you smoke and you feel that, okay, smoking is fine because I'm just doing it in my own house, and it's not affecting other people. But in a sense, if you do that, and if you get sick because of that, your dependence will also be affected in a sense. All right. So just thinking about it, and and of course we can always read up on what are the effects or consequences of certain things. I think that would be helpful, and talking to people about it. So it's kind of difficult to just say, how do we come up with this? I mean, I think for all of us, me and so on, we are always learning about, or sometimes it's only after the fact that we say, oh, our consequences have effect on other people. Okay, so putting stuff that we do in the Facebook or on other social media also have an effect on other people. All right, so it may create envy and jealousy and so on. So think about it. All right, anything which is positive also, maybe that's good. But also, I think what is more important is our intention, our niyyah. All right. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for the clarification, Prof.
Right.
I may need to skip some questions because it is incomplete or like unclear. In the event where your question is being skipped, you have the opportunity to approach the instructor personally through her email, I think, inshallah. Okay.
Yeah, you can.
So next question, at-tayyibat, how can we measure? Is it based for social norms, or is it based on social norms?
Okay, again, as we said, this tayyibat, again, just first of all, follow the rulings. We know there are certain things which are good, there are certain things which are prohibited. But, some certain things, like you said, okay, we don't know, is this good or bad? It's always, there are new things that's happening. So, do research, Now, alhamdulillah, we can actually do our own research, just Google. My motto is always, every time when people ask, okay, let's Google, all right? Because we can get information, from the internet. Of course, you have to make sure, you have to be wise to make sure whether the information is substantive, have substance or not. All right, there must be some justification. We cannot, just say, some people say this is tayyibat, this is good. All right, eating raisins from some people who have put prayers into it and so on. Well, personally, I find it's a little bit nonsense, but raisins in general probably is good. All right, but for some people, they may be allergic to that. So in that sense, it's not good. So in a sense, there is, what I'm trying to say is, there's no like one fixed answer for everything. And especially for things that are already out there, the traditional goods and services, is actually quite easy to determine whether it's tayyibat or not. But there are many other things, goods and especially services, which you're not sure, all right, is this good or not? All right, so we need to just go and find out and get more information. I'm not sure whether I am fully answering the question from that person, but I cannot give you a fixed, definite answer for this.
Okay. I hope that satisfy the one who asked the question, inshallah. Yeah. Right. Okay, next question. How a market can adopt values as suggested by Islam to consume?
Yeah, so in a way, the market is driven by both consumers and producers and government and so on. So I'm not sure, I think you have already had. So everyone has a role to play. All right, everyone has a role to play. And, so when we talk about, somebody said we need to be sincere on spending. Correct. That's what, again, we have to make sure that we have that. Right, going back to what I'm saying, so for us as individual consumers, all right, so we ourselves practice that. All right, if we ourselves, if many of us practice that, we will demand certain goods and services, right, that are consistent with, what Islam has prescribed. So producers will, cater to those needs. But if we don't, and we, demand more of things that are not along the junctions of Islam, then of course, producers will do that as well. That is from, the consumer side, all right, the demand driven. But sometimes producers can also create new things and so on. So as consumers or as the general public, if something which is not along the lines, then we should voice, our opinions in many ways. Number one, don't buy the goods. Number two, tell other people about it. All right. And number three, maybe form certain, go through certain more formal kind of, channels to make sure that these voices are heard. Okay. But if you are in the policy, or you become, the policy maker, or you rule the government, so that'll be much easier, which is a little bit difficult for most of us. But I think each one of us have a part to play.
All right. Next question. Is CSR a way for compensating positive externality when they are unavoidable?
Yeah, I think, everyone has a role to play, especially for companies and organizations, all right? So, of course, one of the way is to make sure that we do a lot of social works and so on. As I've mentioned, I think in the slide, I said, if people play their roles, for at consumer level, we can help, a certain extent. Of course, it will not solve the problem, in general. So, of course, the companies and large organizations, they have a very important role to play. And they also, by doing that, it will also, of course, goodwill to them, all right, to the companies and the organizations, but it will also encourage other companies, other organizations to do the same, all right? So I think this is very important for sure.
Okay. What should be done in order to invite the community to always not be excessive in consuming?
Well, what should be done? I think first we have to be the example, all right? Because education starts from home. If we want to preach to other people, we have to make sure that we ourselves actually live that way, all right? Sometimes we look at, people say these things and so on, but when we look at, the way that they live, they don't live that way. So actually it has a detrimental effect, all right? Not only people will say, look, you are saying this, you're preaching this, but you're not doing it. So it's actually worse, okay? For me, rather than you do that, you better, if you cannot live that way, don't preach others to do that. But it is actually important for us to consciously think about how we live our life, how we consume, all right? And making sure that we understand, this is going back to the external cost and in a way benefit, all right? How we live our life, we may think that other people, nobody will care how we live, but people will look at, how we live our life, our friends, our neighbors, us as lecturers, our students, our colleagues and so on. So if we live the life that is consistent with the Islamic principles, in a way already that would help to make sure that these principles and will be promoted indirectly. And of course, I guess giving a lecture like this would also help. Inshallah.
Definitely, I think so. Okay, this is one way to call for a better consumption behavior, right? Looking at the time, maybe we can take one more question before we close the Q&A session. How much the higher percent spend on the income for consumption in Islam, and how to manage when the gain income cost gain the consumption also.
I'm sorry, the last part is what?
The first part, how much
The
the
last
higher
part.
percent spend on the how much the higher percent spend the income for consumption in Islam. I think how much of your income should be spent for consumption according to
Okay.
Islam.
There's none. Again, like, of course, everybody wants nice answers. Okay, you should spend only this much for your income. It depends, as I said, it depends, because if you earn, a 1,000 ringgit, for instance, I have to put it in ringgit. I know people are coming from different countries, but you cannot say, okay, you must spend only 70% from this 1,000 ringgit. 1,000 ringgit cannot afford to buy anything at all. But, if you have high income, how much should you spend? There is no such, percentage. But as long as you, to me, abide by the general principles, the 4 general principles, I'm sure there are other general principles, related to that. But, as long as you are, you feel that you have abide by all this, then I think you should be fine. Okay, some people can get by just spending, 30% of their income, even though their income may not be very high. Some people may have very high income, but their obligations are also a lot. So it is kind of difficult to say, just have this percentage. All right. Just maybe one thing that I want to maybe touch on close is that, people say, oh, what about sustainability? I did not say anything about sustainability. This is the buzz, the current thing everybody's talking about, sustainability. In fact, actually in Islam, sustainability is already there since the beginning. When you spend moderately, you're being sustainable. When you don't spend on things which are wasteful, you are being sustainable. When you, making sure that the needs of your family and your dependents and so on, these are already being sustainable. So, just try and follow what's prescribed by Allah, and inshallah, we will live a good life, and in the here and the hereafter, inshallah. Okay.
All right. Maybe you would like to address the second part of the question, how to manage when there is an increase in income, there is also an increase in consumption.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, as I said, when you have more income, of course you want to spend more, for sure. All right. But as long as you are, within the range of moderation, why not? Go ahead. I have no issue with people, living comfortably and so on. All of us want to live comfortably, but not excessively. That's the point. And if you have, higher income, maybe some of it, if you can, give to charity, some of it you save. So you have to be wise when you have this, but I don't think it's right to say, no, we cannot spend so much. Allah has given us, this wealth for us to spend, but spend rightly. That's all.
All right. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Prof. I think that is the last question for you. So I can see some people asking for your emails and all. As for your information, dear participants, all email of all instructors are provided in our brochure. So where can you get this? Is from our CIE website. We have put our brochure there. As Prof said just now, Google. Okay, you can Google CIEIIUM. Inshallah, you'll be directed to our website, and there is where you can get all the information, including the slides. Okay, just that for slides for today's session will be uploaded, inshallah,
right.
during the weekdays.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, maybe we can close the first session. Inshallah, we can have around 10 minutes to 11 minutes break. We'll start the second session at 11 a.m. Malaysian time, inshallah, by having Associate Professor Dr. Nahar to deliver his lecture. We would like to thank you again, Prof, for your really wonderful lecture. Thank you so much.
All right. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back. I hope you are refreshed after the break. It's 11 a.m. now in Malaysia. So let's proceed with our lecture. We have with us today Associate Professor Dr. Nahar. I believe this instructor or this speaker is the one who does not need a long introduction because he was with us during the third week of the lecture, I think. He gave a lecture on third sector economy, which has gained popularity and interest by many. Okay, so I would like to pass the floor to Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Nahar to talk about market structure and its also issues related to market structures. Over to you, Doctor. I think you mute your mic, Doctor.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Zara, am I clear now?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, sorry. It's connected to the other device. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Amma ba'd. Thank you, Dr. Zara, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who are still here joining the session. My topic today is on market structures. And before I proceed, if you listen the live now on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to IIIT channel. And if you are on Facebook, maybe you can like the video. This is to promote our program. And that's also the convention of YouTubers. They will ask you to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like also. To proceed, the topic today is on market structures. And this is slightly different than maybe the previous speaker before, Prof. Selamah. She talks about consumption. Consumption is one part in the market, where in the market, you will have the demand side and the supply side. And market, there are many types of markets, right? So today we will go to a more detailed, slightly detailed discussion about market structure. What's the learning outcome of the discussion today? I have three major learning outcomes. Inshallah, I plan to cover for both slots. I have a slot from 11 to 11:45, and then continuing to the second slot after that, up until 12:30. So for both slots, inshallah, I will try to achieve the following three learning objectives. The first learning objective is to understand the advantages and disadvantages of markets. Maybe some of you who have joined earlier discussions before presented by Dr. Riyasat, he talks about market in Islam. Market in Islam. With that, some knowledge that you may have learned earlier. So today, slightly I will go into a bit deeper section on that discussion. The second learning objective is to look at or to recognize the various types of market structures that exist in the economy. Maybe for those who have not learned economic as a formal way in your study before, today we will discover at least 4 types of market structures, and each of these market structures will create different perspective and even issues, especially when we want to look from Islamic perspective. So that's the second learning objective. And the third learning objective is for us to realize various issues related to market structures from an Islamic perspective. So maybe this third part would attract more attention from the audience because we will focus on selected issues related to market structure. Now, to proceed, to start the discussion, let's first understand market. Market can be a form of mechanism and it can be a form of institutions. I will explain both after this, but first let's look at what is a market. Basically, market refers to a meeting place for buyers and sellers to do exchange activities. So it's a meeting place between buyers and sellers. We can divide market into two categories, product market and resource market. For today, I will focus more about the product market. What is a product market? It is a place where the buyers buy goods and services from the sellers. Like when we go to our supermarket, when we go to our mall, souk, or market, that's where we buy goods and services. So that's very common to us. Market can be a mechanism, as I mentioned earlier. It can be a mechanism. When we say market as a mechanism, this is where in economics you will see diagram like this, where you have the demand curve. This is the demand curve. And then this is the supply curve. This is a form of representing the idea of market mechanism using the demand and supply curves. Why mechanism? Because the demand and supply curve, they can shift. They can also be a movement along the demand curve or movement along the supply curve. I just want to show you here that it can be a mechanism. There is a mechanism how market operates, at least theoretically captured by the demand and supply curves. So that's put aside. What is then market as an institution? Market as an institution is when you have some sort of official and you need to register the marketplace. I give example like the stock market, stock exchange. In Malaysia, we have Bursa Malaysia, we have New York Stock Exchange. Over there, people buy stocks. It's a marketplace, but that marketplace is a registered official and doing specific types of market exchanges. It's a form of institutions. Definitely in that institutions, there are market mechanisms. So just to highlight on that two differences. Apart from knowing that market can be a mechanism, market can be a form of institutions, today we will focus on the discussion about market as a structure. So in economics, when we say market structure, it refers to what's in the market. For example, the focus will be on the number, the size, and the interactions of firms in a particular market. In short, market structure refers to behavior of firms in that particular market. And firms' behavior depends on the number of competitors, the size of that particular firms, mainly that. So that's what we will see today. Before we go to that, just to put you into a better perspective on the discussion, when we say markets, just to highlight, in the economy, we have the public sector, the government, we have the private sector, and we have the third sector. I talked about third sector before. Today, I'm talking about the private sector. In the private sector, there are firms, companies, and there are individuals, usually individuals, households. We are the buyers in the product markets. When we talk about the private sector, market is therefore a very important mechanism for the private sector, for that matter, to communicate. What types of communication usually we have interest in the market? Communicating price of goods, price of services. How much is the price of the new iPhone? How much is the price of the clothes that you want to buy? How much is the price of cows you want to buy for Aidil Adha next year? We get that price from the market. And then, not just we get the price from the market also has the role to set the price. If you can look at my diagram here, right? So this is the price. I'm drawing using my mouse pad, so sorry for this not beautiful drawing. And this is the quantity Q, quantity of output. Price set by the market is when the demand and supply are intersecting. So here, this is the equilibrium quantity of outputs you get, and this is the price. Right? This is the equilibrium price set by the market. So market has the role, the function to set the price in the economy. Third, market also provide the facilities for buyers and sellers to do deals and transaction. Today we have the online market, eBay. We have various types of market today. In Malaysia, popular now is Shopee, Lazada. These are platforms. eBay is a platform, it's a marketplace. And over there, people do transactions. Right? We find the best deals, we can see reviews, we can communicate or chat with the buyer, with the sellers and buyers. Right? So that's also provided by the market. And then, I think the last one here, market would influence resource allocation and wealth in the economy. This is a big point, very important. Just to make it short, recall that a very, very much market-driven economy, a capitalist market system, right? That's very much driven by market. Market would influence how resources are allocated, but in the context of a command economic system where you have the government who would decide on how products would be produced and so on, that's the command economic system. Okay, here I have the diagram. So here, this is a command economic system. Or some people would say this is a socialist system. Example like North Korea. And on the other side, we have the market economic system, a capitalist system, laissez-faire system, very much driven by the market. So here you have the spectrum, all right? If we talk about to the left side of this picture, right, to the left side of this arrow, this is where market would be very dominant. The forces of market would determine how resources would be allocated. And this is evident in a context of countries such as Japan, Singapore, United States. These are an example of capitalist system or market economic system. On the other side, of this diagram over here, all right, market is not very strong. Theoretically speaking, in the context of a common economic system, everything would be decided by the government. Market is not that sophisticated. So market forces in the command system is weak. In between of these two systems, we have the mixed economic system. So mixed economic system is where we have both mixture between market and the state, the government, in deciding how economic decisions are made. Example of mixed economic system, we can say Malaysia, many European countries, welfare state, they have a mixture of those. In general, many countries today are having some form of mixed economic system. The question that we want to at least try to have a bit of perspective is, where is the Islamic system? In this spectrum, when we say the Islamic economic system, how the system puts market. Where's the balance? All right. Just to give you a spoiler alert, Islamic economists have their own spectrum in looking at how Islamic economic system should be. Should market be the main driving force, or should it is more like a mixed economic system, or you have more towards government. Government becomes so powerful, would dictate everything. There are some spectrum also when it's come to putting Islamic economics in our modern world today. So now when we say market, what I have done so far, I have defined market. I mentioned about market structures, the functions of the market. And here I show you the spectrum where when it's come to economic system also can be defined, can be influenced by the degree of market function in it. Capitalism is very much a market-driven economy. Okay? So now, let's focus back on market. Why market is so important? To answer that question, I asked these basic economic questions. Right? We go to the basic. These questions are very important in economics. What are the questions? The first one, what to produce? The second one, how to produce? The third one, for whom to produce, and when to produce is the last question. Maybe some textbook may have different variation of the questions, but more or less, it comes to these 4 points. What to produce, how to produce, for whom, and when to produce. The answers to these 4 questions can come from the market. It can come from the market if we talk about a capitalist system. The answers, on the other hand, can come from the government if we talk about a socialist or command economic system. All right? So the answers to these questions basically depends on which system we follow, which system the economy follows. Because today we want to understand about market structure, so our focus will be more towards the market economy. Right? Now, let's go a bit into the context of market from an Islamic perspective. Maybe this is a form of revisiting some points briefed by Dr. Riyasat weeks earlier. Among Islamic economists, market mechanism from an Islamic perspective. The following hadith narrated by Anas ibn Malik is a very famous hadith among Islamic economists today. Why this hadith is so important and very popular? Because some Islamic economists would quote this hadith to highlight that the Islamic economic system prefers market mechanism as the way to allocate the resources. With that premise, that means these economists would say, government, please don't intervene much in the market. Let market do its magic. So that's the idea here. And they use this as a dalil to support the point. What if we go into this hadith very quickly? The people of Madinah at one point, they met Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they told him, "O Messenger of Allah, prices have shot up. Prices have shot up. Prices has gone up." And therefore, they asked Prophet SAW to fix the price in the economy, fix prices for us. Over here, people would interpret that Prophet SAW is the leader of the state, the government, and people talk to him, telling him, okay, please government, fix prices, put some control over this hike in prices. If you can imagine today, everywhere in the world, people talk about rising price level or inflation due to war in Ukraine, due to COVID-19 effects, many other reasons, right? So government all over the world is now fighting inflation. And that's, we can relate to this hadith. So what's Prophet ﷺ answered to this request? Rasulullah ﷺ in this case, give this answer. Allah is the ones who fix prices, who withholds, gives lavishly, and he is the one that would also withhold and provides. And then, okay, let's go to that part first. When Prophet answer like this, that means Prophet say to the people who ask him, he said, leave this matter to Allah Ta'ala. Leave this matter to Allah Ta'ala. That means in this context, Prophet ﷺ, we say, I will not involve in this price fixing. And that's become the point where Islamic economists argue, okay, market is the best way, right, to solve some economic issues. Government should not interfere. And here Prophet ﷺ, the next part of the hadith, Prophet ﷺ give the reason why he did not interfere in this context. Right? Because he answered here, I hope that when I meet Allah, none of you will have any claim. Right? None of you will have any claim on me for any injustice. Right? Okay, we can go very deep into this discussion actually. The point here is sometimes when government intervene, some segment in the market would become victim to the situation. For example, if government put price cap, right? Government said price of petrol should not go more than, let's say, $4 per gallon. I don't know what's the gallon price. I know in ringgit Malaysia, I know. When government set price like that, sometimes sellers are not happy because if we let market to decide the price can go higher. And sellers would say, we become victim. You government is not just to us. So this is one issue. Definitely in economics, when we talk about this analysis, we have the dead weight loss in the economy. And that can represent this concept of the loss to the economy, loss to the sellers, can be also loss to the buyers, and that can create some form of injustice. So anyway, just to make this hadith into context of the discussion today, it's famous because it brings to the point that market is important in Islamic economics. However, this hadith should be carefully taken as dalil by Islamic economists when it's come to rejecting any intervention by the government. Remember, Prophet did not intervene in this context of the hadith with certain background in Madinah of that time. All right? There is a background situation where the best way to solve these rising prices is to let market make adjust and let's market solve the problems. But at other times, Prophet also intervene in the market, right? To strengthen behavior, right? To regulate behavior. Sometimes that's also happen. Okay? So that's just to show you one important hadith usually you will see in writings related to Islamic economics. Moving to the next slide. We haven't go to the different type of market structure. That one I will discuss after this. Now, when we say market, I give you the hadith here just to show you the position of some Islamic economists. I would say today, majority of them, right, would say Islamic economics prefers market to allocate the resources. Now, you may have this question. What's the difference between market in Islam and market in the capitalist system? If President Joe Biden met you at the airport and say, oh, you learn Islamic economics, and he said, I heard Islamic economics also prefers market. What's the difference between your Islamic market and my United States market? United States market means capitalist market. So the following are the quick answer to that question. Right? The following can be the quick answer you can give to President Biden on that. 3 differences. The first one, for Islamic market, there is a strong assumption made by Islamic economists today about the economic agents. Who are the economic agents? The players in the market. Who are the players in the market? Households, individuals, firms, government also can be players, workers also can be the players. But the major players, when we talk about product market, are buyers and sellers, individuals, buyers, and firms. Islamic men. In short, Islamic men, we assume that these Islamic men, they are moral or spiritual maximizer. And they are also material maximizer. In short, we want to be successful in this world and also successful in the hereafter. That's the idea of Islamic man. And Islamic man is assumed to follow Islamic teachings. If the Islamic man is not a Muslim, the person respects the teaching of Islam. Therefore, Islamic economists use the term Islamic man, not Muslim, because this term also includes the non-Muslim, as long as the non-Muslim respect the teaching of Islam. So that's the idea. In contrast, in a capitalist market, we have this assumption, the assumption that the economic agents, they are economic men, rational economic men, and their main objective is to achieve material maximization. As firms, if they become a producer, seller, the objective is to maximize profit. As a consumer, the objective is to maximize utility or satisfaction. That's the assumption. No regard at all to the life in the hereafter, because it's very much material aspect. So that's the big difference. And definitely, these two assumptions matters a lot, because when we say Muslims' behavior in the market, we don't do something that is prohibited in Islam, because we know, right? We want to achieve the highest reward in the hereafter. We want to get the highest reward in the hereafter. That's spiritual maximization attitude. And at the same time, when we behave in the market, we also want to get the best deal. That's material maximization attitude. We want both success in this world and success in the hereafter. Next, right? The next different market in Islam. This is also important. The demand and supply in the Islamic economic system is based on the Islamic rules of the game. That's number one, Islamic rules of the game. The demand and supply is based on Islamic rules of the game, Islamic rules, and also man-made rules. The rules that government has decided, we need to respect also. So these are, this is number two. You look at over here for the capitalist system, there are still demand and supply in the market, but the demand and supply are only subject to man-made rules only. Only one side of the rules. If the rules allow gambling to be licensed, then maybe the secular government will do that. But in the Islamic system, we cannot do that, because Sharia would not allow gambling. Now, number three, there is also attitude in the market in Islam where we consider the government or the states and the third sector, the voluntary sector, are integrated sectors in the economy. Integrated means they can cooperate, they can collaborate their activities together to achieve or to maximize the maslahah of the people. Maximization of the maslahah. That's a keyword, key term. So that's the perspective that we can put when it's come to the attitudes toward the government and the attitudes toward the third sector. On the other side, in a pure capitalist system, the attitude towards the state is government should only have minimal or non-interventional posture. Right? Non-interventional posture of the state means government should not interfere in the market as much as possible. Because if you read economics textbook today, most of it is a capitalist-based neoclassical theories. It's very much about market-driven economy. When it's come to tax subsidies introduced by the government, the textbook would say these are some form or example of market intervention. When government come into the market, it create market disturbance. Market become inefficient. Market in a capitalist ideology, they are not welcoming the government. Therefore, according to this ideology, government should keep away from the economy. Government should only do the basic government jobs. What are they? To maintain law and order, to provide public goods and services, and to maintain sovereignty of the system. Basically, these are the three basic rules. So these are, I would say, the crux of the differences. Details you can read. Each of these points, they have very much literature, strands of literature by themselves. All right, now you can see what I have funneled through the discussion. Right? We talk about this market system to answer the basic economic questions. Islamic system prefers market to allocate the resources, and we highlight the differences between market in the Islamic system and market in the capitalist system. Now we go to the real deal here. Market structure. Market structures, I would say. Usually we will discuss about this in the convention, in the microeconomics. Microeconomics discussion, we will discuss about market structure, and this chapter comes under the topic of firms' behavior or theory of firms. We can divide the market into four major structures. The first one is the perfect competition. Perfect competition, or sometimes refers as pure competition. That's the first one. And then on the other extreme, we have monopoly. Maybe, I think monopoly, everyone are familiar with the word monopoly. People, I would say, know what is monopoly in general, but the details, what is monopoly, maybe if we don't learn economics, we may not really get to the essence of what is monopoly. And definitely there is a board game called Monopoly also. In between of these two types of market structures, you have two more. You have monopolistic competitive market or monopolistic competition, and then you have oligopoly market. Therefore, realize here that when we discuss about markets in economics, market can be about demand and supply, but when we zoom into the discussion, there are more details on that. And when it's come to giving hukum in Islam about certain behavior of firms in the market, I would say jurists also need to be aware of these market structures. Jurists, our fuqaha, needs to be aware of these types of market structures. Later, we will select some issues just to give you the flavor on the issue and how we need to be careful when we want to give rulings related to behavior of firms in the market. In this diagram also, you can see that we can put these four market structures into a spectrum. On the top arrow here, you can see moving to the left side of this diagram, it indicates more competition in the market. That means more competitions. When we talk about perfect competition from the name perfect competition, that means there are a lot of firms in the market. They are competing with one another. So that means more competition. On the other side, when we go towards the side of the monopoly, there is less competition. Monopoly itself can mean only one single firm that exists in the economy. One single firm. The firm is the only producer of the product. No competition, basically. Very extreme. So there are many issues that we need to realize on that. In between of this spectrum, when we talk about oligopoly, that means the level of competition starts to diminish. But when we move towards monopolistic competition, there are some form of competitions in the system, in the market structure. All right. Now, on the lower side of this diagram, it also indicates the level of concentration in the market. Under the perfect competition, there is less concentration. Less concentration here means market is not fragmented. Right? That means when you have a lot of firms, right? Buyers have a lot of choices, right? And that creates less concentration of market control by the single firm. On the other side, when we have a monopoly, it is very concentrated. That single firm have a concentration over the market share in the economy. So basically, that's the idea here. All right. So now, remember, market can be a market mechanism, can be market as an institutions. Market also can appear as a system. Capitalism is based on a market system. Market has 4 structures as presented here. All right. So here I give you various points related to when we say market in economics, it can mean many things. Now, let's go a bit into detail on what are these market structures. Actually, in microeconomics, each of these market structure have a dedicated chapter by themselves. Students usually in microeconomics will study like 2 weeks just for one chapter on pure competition, on monopoly, on on monopolistic competition, and on oligopoly. So it's very theoretical. Some students sometimes say we don't like microeconomics because of the graphs and so on. But here, don't worry, I will make it much easier as long as the audience can get the understanding of what is this market structure. Okay, to understand market structure, we will focus on 1, 2, 3, 4 important characteristics of the market structure. We will look at these 4 characteristics or criteria. The first criteria is market structure can be defined by the number of firms in the market. Number of firms matters. And then the second criteria, market structure also can be based on firms' ability to control price in the market. Number 3, barriers to entry also matters in defining market structure. And then the level of product differentiation also matters in order for us to understand what type of market structure we are talking about. Right? So very quickly, I will go maybe give you a brief one. Perfect competition. We start with perfect competition. There are many firms in the perfectly competitive firms. Many firms. So here you can imagine, let's go to the example so that you can get the picture quickly. This is the example over here. Usually, perfectly competitive market is not in existence. Your many economic textbook at one point will admit that. Because when we say perfect, there is no perfect things in this world. Perfection belongs to Allah Ta'ala. So, however, if you want to see some example, many textbook would quote, right, farm products like such as farmers, they are producer, right, wheat farmer or corn farmers. There are many wheat farmers. So here many here means many farmers who supply wheat or corns or rice or whatever, usually agricultural product. Many firms, in short. All right. Because there are so many firms, I go first on perfectly competition. In terms of the second characteristics, ability to control price, each farmer, mark my word, each farmer, one single farmer, has no power to control price. If you say you don't like the current wheat price in the economy, so you say, I want to boycott the market, I don't want to farm any wheat for this season, your behavior, your single behavior will not affect the wheat market at all. You have no influence of the market because there are too many other farmers that will make their own decision. So that's what we mean by influence over the price, ability to control price. Each single farmer don't have that power. And then the third characteristic, barrier to entry. Barrier to entry here refers to, is it difficult for new farmers to come into the agricultural market to produce wheat? Basically, we can say none. Because this is a free market. People can come, people can exit. So there is none. And then therefore, each farmer, I stick to my farmer example, they have very little ability to differentiate the product. For example, wheat. When we talk about wheat production, how we want to differentiate our wheat? Wheat to normal people is just wheat. Maybe there are some quality differences and so on, but in general, they are homogeneous. They are the same thing. Right? Product differentiation in a perfectly competitive market is very little. So that's one. These are the characteristics of the perfectly competitive market. The second one, so now let's compare with pure monopoly. At least we can see the difference based on the four characteristics here. When we say a monopoly, look at the difference. You have only one single seller compared to pure competition just now, many. Single seller. Maybe in your kampung, in your village, sorry, the word kampung means village in Malaysia, in Malay. In our village, there is one single shop selling the basic needs of people in the village. One single. That can be geographical monopoly. A geographical monopoly. Zam-Zam water, where there is only one place you can get Zam-Zam water. Ownership of Zam-Zam water is a form of monopoly. Just to give you a point to think about. Now, number two, ability to control price for a monopoly is very high because they are the only producer of the product, so they can control the price. They have the power to control the price. That's why sometimes when you read economics book, a monopoly is also called the price maker. Price maker. A monopoly is a price maker. On the other side, the other market earlier, perfect competitive market, because they have no control over price, they are called price taker. Price taker for perfect competition, price maker for the monopoly. Why? Because a monopoly has high ability to control the price. The third point, in terms of the criteria to make the comparison, barrier to entry. A monopoly by itself has certain degree to have barrier to entry. In other words, a monopoly can do something within its control over the market to stop any new firms to come in. But that type of behavior is usually illegal. All right. Therefore, government is subject to government regulations. So this is a very tricky part because this is where the halal and haram of monopoly can come in. And the last point here, no products that compete with that with the monopoly's product. Okay, so when we say product differentiation for a monopoly, they are selling one unique product. You can only get that product from these particular firms. And here we have the example of monopoly. Usually in a country, the utility company, electricity company, usually they have this monopoly power. Water company in many countries have this power, monopoly power. Cable television also, they have power. Right? So that's the example of monopoly. So basically, I have covered some basic discussion related to a monopoly and also perfectly competition. Dr. Zara, if you are there, should I continue or I stop?
Yes, Doctor, you can continue.
So I continue until finish lah, until 12:30.
If you want to take a rest, also can.
I think I will continue. Maybe I stop 10 minutes or 5 minutes before 12:30.
Okay, sure can.
Okay. So I will continue because let's maintain the floor. The audience, just to recap, we already get to the first round of the session up until 45 minutes. So what I have done, I have discussed about market structure. Let's recap so that we know where we are in the discussion. We talk about market as we define market. We talk about the definition of market structure. We understand the function of market. We know that market can exist in different economic systems, consider market power differently. The market can answer the basic economic questions. Islamic economic system, I would say. Be careful, we don't say Islam something, because I would say Islamic economic system prefers market as a way to allocate the resources based on the hadith. And then here we see the main differences between market from Islamic perspective versus market in the capitalist system. And then we go to the 4 types of market structures. Okay? So what I have done so far also, I use this diagram to show you the differences across the 4 market structures depends on the attributes or characteristics as given by this table. So far, we only look at the 2 market structures, perfect competition and also pure monopoly. For monopolistic competition and oligopoly, I will go very quickly, but I will go based on the example. What is a monopolistic competitive market? If you look at this diagram, this monopolistic competition is situated much closer to the pure competition. So in this market, what is important is each firms, because there are many firms, there are many firms in the market, in a monopolistic competition, many, but slightly less than pure competition. So each firm try to make their product unique by going to advertising, for example, to make product differentiation apparent to their customers. Product differentiation is very important. Okay? Emphasis on showing what's unique about the product. Example as stated here. When we look at the clothing industry, retail, clothing. There are many firms selling clothes, t-shirts, jeans, or many other forms of clothing, right? But there are brands, certain brands that we know. For example, for sport brands, maybe majority of us are aware of the sport brands like Adidas, like Nike, Puma, and so on. They are selling the same things, but they try to show their products are unique. So to achieve that, they may go heavy on advertising, packaging, marketing, and so on. So some firms can become very strong in portraying their product differentiation, and they become unique and they gain loyal customers. On the other one, we have an oligopoly. Oligopoly, if you look at this diagram, it's much closer towards monopoly. So there are not many number of firms in an oligopolistic market, few firms. What's unique about this oligopoly is, let's see the example here. Some firms in the oligopoly, there are not many of them. For example, still is not that famous, yeah. Automotive or automobile industry, car makers, only few car makers in the world. Sometimes in a country there are only one or two. It can be a monopoly or it can be a duopoly. But when you have more than 2, 3, 4, 5, it can become an oligopoly. The cellular services that you have in your country maybe is an oligopoly. The petroleum company, the gas company or petrol company, some countries they have only few. That's a form of oligopoly. Usually the issue related to oligopoly is that the firms can come together and they can form what we call cartel. They collude, they form cartel, and they can become a monopoly, a problem. So that's basically the background of market structures. I think when we comes to what's in Islamic economics on this, let's go to the issues here. Selected issues basically related to market structures. And these issues, I would pick to show you some points related to Islamic economics. So here, recall, we have the 4 types of market structures. Let's focus on the first one. Pure competition or perfect competition. What's the issues here? The first one, realize that theoretically speaking, this is the most ideal form of market. Ideal. This is the nirvana of market ideology. I would also say that when we say the capitalist system, how they promote markets, they manage to present the ideal of market using theories under perfect competition chapter. It's very ideal, but in reality, there is no such real industry that can represent pure competition. Therefore, we ended up picking agricultural sector like farmers of wheat. There are many farmers. Why it is ideal? Because this is why it is ideal. Theoretically speaking, right, these 2 points highlights the ideal of pure competition. It leads to efficiency. When you let market to be free by itself, without much intervention from the government, it can give us efficiency in the market. To be more technical, we can divide efficiencies into 2, allocative and productive efficiency. What are they? Don't worry about this diagram. I just want to make my point. If you study the chapter in the long run, maybe some of you have long not visiting this chapter, right? This is what happened in the pure competition market in the long run. What happened here is, for this single firm, this is the price for the single firm. The firms get the price from the market. And what happened? This is the average total cost. And over here, you see, the firm will charge price at the minimum average total cost point. And that's what we call productive efficiency. Productive efficiency is when price is equal to minimum average total cost. That means the firm, a single firm in a perfect competition, managed to sell and produce their outputs at the least cost possible. They are efficient. Why? Because they are using the best technology, for example. Right? And they are also allocatively efficient because at this point also is equal to marginal cost. When price equal to marginal cost, that's allocative efficiency. That's I put aside. I don't want to go to that technical. But what is Islamic on this? Okay, this is Islamic about pure competition. What is Islamic? It leads to efficiency. Efficiency is very Islamic. Firms must be efficient. ahsanu amala. Allazi khalaqal mauta wal hayata liyabluwakum ayyukum ahsanu amala. You become efficient, you are ahsan also in your behavior. So that's Islamic. However, that's very ideal. Right? Theoretically, it's very ideal. And another thing we need to realize that when we say pure competition, in the analysis, when economists manage to show that it's very efficient, but the reality is when it's come to deriving this cost for the monopoly, for the pure competition, the cost here, it excludes it excludes costs that is external to the firms. For example, externalities, pollution. Firms sometimes pollute the environment because they want to minimize their costs. That's pollution is not counted by the firm as a cost to them. Definitely it's a cost to the society. Sometimes that's become an issue. That's not counted in the theory, in practice also. But sometimes today government will do something to ensure firms also include the externality costs, such as carbon tax. Okay? That's another discussion. So that's one point we need to realize. Another issue when it's come to this market is the issue of normal profit. What is normal profit? Normal profit is when the firm, this is the price. In this context, there is zero economic profit, or zero economic profit means there is some normal profit for this firm. Let's revisit our agricultural sector for farmers. Farmers in the long run would only enjoy normal profit. Right? They just manage to get little bit of profit. Let me put in a very simple word. Normal profit means you get some profit, but little. Not economic profit, not comfortable profit for you to move forward as a company. That's what happened in agricultural sectors for farmers. What happened then in many countries, slowly farmers are more happy to convert their farmland into commercial land or industrial land. That's the long run implication. All right, because usually when we have a perfectly competitive market, firms in the long run only enjoy normal profits or zero economic profits. The long run consequence of this is the conversion of the resources into some other production that can give them better profits. Let me put it like that. It's very technical, but just to highlight some issues there. Second point, I will dwell a bit more on this point just to show you the issues, right? Issues. Let's go to monopoly. Monopoly is the one type of market structure that when I go to the literature, I find sometimes even some of our some people have a wrong idea about monopoly. Because a monopoly is a unique firm in one single, this firm, one firm selling one particular product, very unique. So we need to evaluate monopoly behavior based on a case-by-case analysis. I would say, this is my humble opinion, don't jump into straight conclusion saying that Islam forbids monopoly. Islam prohibits monopoly. If you just type on Google, Islamic perspective on monopoly, you will find many, at least bloggers. They would give a lot of dalil to say Islam prohibits monopoly or monopoly is haram in Islam. But when I go to their dalil that they use, as economists, I would say that's not monopoly. They are not talking about monopoly. They may talk about some behavior that is more done by monopoly. But any firms can to the thing. I will highlight some points there. All right, I will highlight some points there. Remember my point earlier, Zamzam, ownership of Zamzam is a form of monopoly. All right. If you have a shop in your village, one single shop selling basic needs to the people in the village, remote village, is a form of geographical monopoly. You want to say haram to that? Just be careful. Okay? Don't jump to that conclusion very quickly. Right? So now, most of the issues I would highlight based on monopoly. Some of the common misconception about monopoly. By the way, just to make my point clear, I'm not defending a monopoly. I just want to clarify, inshallah, some misconception so that when we say a monopoly from an Islamic perspective, we don't say haram. No, we need to know what's the issue here. All right. So what are the common misconceptions? The first one, monopoly would charge the highest price possible. That's very common. People, when normal common people talk about monopoly, they think that monopoly would charge the highest price. For economists, even for those who run a monopoly, they would know they are not charging the highest price. Yes, a monopoly is a price maker. They can decide the price. They can set the price. But if they set the price too high, nobody will buy their products. That's the issue. Let's take this example. Let's say iPhone by Apple. The only company that produce that product is Apple. You cannot buy from other companies, right? We know that iPhone is very expensive. So if Apple wants to sell more, they should sell at a much lower price. And the price set by the company for their product basically is at least theoretically is not the highest price, but the price that can maximize their profit. Okay, so that's one common misconception about the monopoly. Yeah, I will come back to this point slightly later to clarify some other points. And then there are people also who are not, maybe they think a monopoly would always make huge profits, no loss, always huge profit. That's also a common misconception. Realize that a monopoly can also incur loss. There are many monopolies that become bankrupt. Steel company in Malaysia, I don't want to mention names, right? Is having financial problems, a monopoly. There are many reasons for why a monopoly can incur loss. Usually it's related to the cost incurred by them. So realize a monopoly does not necessarily can sit on fat profits. No. All right. All right. This is very common when we read some rulings about monopoly from Islamic perspective, they will relate that to ihtikar, and some classical writings about ihtikar talks about piling of food items, and basically in English terminology, in economics terminology, I would associate that to hoarding activities. What is hoarding? Hoarding is when some companies or a company hide certain products so that they create artificial shortage in the economy, and that creates higher price. I'm not sure why when I read many writings, at least blogs written and some common claims that Islam prohibits monopoly, they would relate to this point. Hoarding can be done not just by a monopoly. It can also be done by any firms from any type of market structure. It can be done by any firms. I can sense the sentiment that maybe for a monopoly, when they hoard their items, it can be so obvious, you know. For example, petrol price, petrol supply. Sometimes, yeah, OPEC control the supply. OPEC is a form of cartel. government would decide, these OPEC countries, the oil producing, exporting countries, they would decide whether they want to release more supply or they want to control the supply. It's a form of ihtikar. Right? It's a form of ihtikar. So that can be controversial. That can create to the behavior is wrong from Islamic perspective. All right. So this is where the most common point where people attack monopoly, why it is prohibited from an Islamic perspective. But realize my point here, any type of market structures like this, any firm in the monopoly in perfect competition, they can also hoard their items. Oligopoly also can do the same, monopoly also can do the same. Definitely when we comes to these two, when they hoard their items, people in the economy would feel the pinch much harder. All right? It's much severe, the implication. That's why maybe this issue is more associated to a monopoly. The next misconception is price discrimination. The word discrimination is usually negative term. However, when we read a chapter on a monopoly, price discrimination, at least to me, it is not negative. It's not negative. What is price discrimination? Before I go to that, theoretically speaking, when a firm wants to make a price discrimination, they need to have these 3 points. They need to have a monopoly power. They need to ensure that those who buy their products will not resell the product, no reselling. And then the company also needs to be able to segregate the markets, to identify or to segment the markets. Example, let's say train services in our country is a monopoly. Train service, train. It's a monopoly. So therefore, you will find that when there are different classes for the train service, the business class, the first class, the business class, and the economy class. Sometimes students will get different price. That's what we call in economics price discrimination. Monopoly usually will do this. For example, let's say Google is a form of monopoly. For Google product, if you want to buy their services, they discriminate for enterprises, for universities, for schools. There are different packages. That's a form of price discrimination. Why monopoly indulge in price discrimination? Yeah, they want to maximize their market gain from all segments in the market. That's for their benefits. At the same time, when they involve in price discrimination, it's also allow those like students, like senior citizens to benefit because they sometimes give much more lower prices. All right. So there are, I would say, I would highlight more on the good things when it comes to price discrimination in this context. And the last 2 points here, before I go to the last point, this one. Theoretically speaking, what's problematic when it's come to market structure discussion? Right? The problems in a market structure discussion is when it comes to these 3 markets. These 3 markets, theoretically speaking, in economics, they are problematic. Why they are problematic? Because they are not efficient. That's the economic argument. They are not efficient, especially when it's come to a monopoly. I can show theoretically why they are not efficient, but I will not do that today. It requires some diagram. But for those who have learned economics, realize the other 3 types, except for perfect competition, they are not efficient. And that's where economists would say something must be done in order to ensure market to be much freer, right? To allow for more competition. What's the main issue? The last one here. Usually when it's come to market structure, what's more problematic is how firm would exploit their position, especially when they become a monopoly. They will have strong power over the economy, especially when they control essential resources. They have a strong power. If a monopoly flex their monopoly position in a negative way to ensure more gain towards themselves, right? That means they are siphoning income from majority to one single firm. And that can be problematic. Usually that's related to the behavior of the monopoly. That's why earlier on, I talked about the assumption on behavior of our economic agents. This one, if you can recall. All right, this one, the behavior of the economic agents. For Islamic producer, we pray to Allah Ta'ala, if we have a Islamic monopoly, that monopoly will not flex its monopoly position for its own gain. The monopoly would become a more considerable monopolist. Just imagine, this is just to show you. Zamzam water today, Alhamdulillah, we don't have problem to get it because the owner, the one who have the custodian over that, is not selling it or charging exorbitant price on the Zamzam water. That's no problem. But with that power comes great power comes great responsibility. Remember that. So that can be very, very tricky to balance when you have that power. This is a diagram to show about monopoly. Few more slides. All right, this is just to show you why sometimes when we say a monopoly, we need to be a bit careful because sometimes a monopoly can be important for the economy for certain strategic reason, right? So here I put a comparison, the advantages and disadvantages of monopoly, so that when we want to give rulings or opinion about monopoly from an Islamic perspective, we need to understand what's the reason for this monopoly to exist in the first place. The first reason on the advantage of a monopoly is a monopoly usually have the economies of scale. That means they have the ability to produce their goods or services at a more efficient cost level. And that would allow them to involve in better research and development. And here also it will promote technological progress in the economy. So this is a very common argument for those who say we need a monopoly, for example, for a strategic economic reasons, like defense, like vaccine. Vaccine require huge R&D capital. Small company cannot basically achieve that unless we have, for example, a monopoly. That's very strategic. A country sometimes need to think this strategically for the maslahah of the ummah. For example, in Malaysia, we have Petronas, our petrol gas company. All over the world now, Petronas is doing petrol exploration, and that's give advantage to Malaysia, and that's a monopoly that the government, I would say, would regulate and like also to have, right? Realize monopoly therefore needs to be regulated. All countries in the world would regulate monopoly. We will talk about that after this. What are some of the disadvantages of the monopoly? Because of their power, usually hoarding activities is very much, when a monopoly hoard their items, the people would feel the pinch of this behavior. This one I can show theoretically, but here I don't have the time. Usually, economists using some theoretical explanation, some data collection also, they found that monopoly tend to charge much higher price compared if we have a competitive market. This is a very hypothetical point, right? But this one is there, one of the disadvantage of monopoly. Monopoly also would limit choice to the buyers because there is only one single firm producing that items. Customers are limited in their choices. That's bad, not good. And then barriers to entry. Sometimes a monopoly would use the monopoly position, the monopoly power as the barrier to entry. That's not good. Therefore, government needs to regulate monopoly in this case, right? So here we can see some of the disadvantages. Therefore, government needs to regulate monopoly, and the following are some points that government can do to regulate monopoly. This is a context, in the context of Malaysia. We have now in Malaysia, quite recently, we have this Competition Act 2010. This is a very important act to, then we have Malaysia Competition Commission as a body to monitor competitive behavior of firms in the economy. That's important for us to monitor monopolies' behavior in the markets. What government can do in order to regulate monopoly? Price control, price capping, to ask the monopoly to limit their price. Right? Theoretically speaking, we can talk about fair return price, socially optimal price, but this is very theoretical. The point here is government can ask the monopoly to not to charge higher from certain level, like price ceiling, price floor. Government can set that. Usually government would regulate the monopoly on that basis. Regulation of mergers. Government would monitor behavior of firms not to come together, collusion, becoming bigger. All right, that's also will be done by the government. Some countries would ask the monopoly to break up their entities. Microsoft, for example, has been asked on this. Google has been monitored on this also, right? Break up some of their entities. Facebook, another one. Government would always monitor this behavior. This is quite extreme, the last point. The nationalization of the monopoly. Government take over the monopoly and make it a public company. So these are some regulations aspect. Issues related to some other form of market structure. For example, monopolistic competition market. Usually, this type of market structure involve too much in making their product different, product differentiation. They involve a lot in advertising. Adidas, for example, right, as an example of firms operating in a monopolistic competitive market. So the following are some issues usually you will find in the literature related to advertising or advertisement from an Islamic perspective. So the attack from Islamic perspective, usually people say, oh, this is the issue underlying advertisement or advertising problems. And that's usually associated with firms in the monopolistic competition. When it's come to oligopoly and monopoly, sometimes they are quite close together. So my points earlier on regulation over monopoly may also be applied here. And oligopoly, sometimes they behave in certain behavior. Mutual interdependence means in an oligopoly market, like petrol stations, they are oligopoly, car makers, they are oligopoly. Usually the slightly smaller firms would follow the leader. And this behavior sometimes creates problem. For example, oligopoly may involve in price or non-price competition. Sometimes in the context of price competition, the leader, the big company in the oligopoly market would start to cut their price very low with the purpose to kill competition. That can be controversial from Islamic perspective. yes, it's good to the customer because now the customer see, oh, now they are competing among themselves to kill one another by cutting the price. Customer can enjoy, right? So that's issue, and merger also is the issue. So I think I'm finishing this. The conclusion for this chapter. Realize that market is very important as a basis or mechanism to allocate the resources. Majority of Islamic economies prefer market mechanism as the way to allocate the resources. When it comes to issues from an Islamic perspective about behavior of firms given the market structure, usually this behavioral issue, the attitude, right, is the problem. The question here is, what if we have a Muslim producer, Islamic producer? Would it becoming better? That's the question. That's usually the point that many Islamic economists, at least from behavioral perspective, would argue, right? Like having Islamic producer would creates a better level of competition. Is it true? That's a question that everyone can do research and try to find out. And then market is important to set the price, setting price, rules of the game. Okay, Islamic perspective is based on Islamic rules of the game. Okay, now today, my last point, when we say market structure, sometimes we also need to realize the national border is getting much blurry. We can look at market structure in terms of global perspective, regional perspective, national perspective, or local market perspective. My example earlier, when I want to show you simple example of a monopoly in our village, that's very local. But at the same time, realize they are global monopoly. Right? Microsoft, Google, these are global monopoly. Vaccine maker, Pfizer, and so on, these are global monopoly. So for Muslims to compete in different types of market levels here, sometimes putting a bigger global perspective is important also. And that's where we need to be careful when we want to say certain, for example, Islam prohibits monopoly. We need to recheck on that claim more, just to make sure that we are not hampering any efforts to create a company from a Muslim countries that can compete at the global stage. That's my point, right? So wallahu alam, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. Thank you so much, Dr. Nahar, for the informative lecture. A very good one indeed. So times for Q&A. I'm trying to divide my attention to all the three platforms that we have. Let's start with Facebook first. Okay, there is one question on Facebook Live. Okay, it is said that there are states that apply mixed economic system, common economic system, and capitalism one, such as China. What do you think, Doctor? I think maybe I can rephrase the question. Why certain countries choose certain economic system?
Good question. The quick answer to this is it's very much influenced by the historical ideological background of that society. For example, who's the colonial power of that country? That can be one strong. Look at the Eastern European countries. They are very much under the Soviet Union before, so they are very much towards the command system. But slowly they are trying to free themselves from that, right? Like Malaysia, we are colonized by British before, so we are more towards that market welfare state type of ideology. That's my quick answer to that.
All right, thank you, Doctor. This is from YouTube. What are the driving forces that metamorphose sellers and buyers in the Islamic context?
What's the word there? That's a jargon.
Metamorphose. I think Okay, what are the driving forces that metamorphose sellers and buyers in the Islamic context?
Okay, buyers, sellers in the Islamic context. Definitely, our religion becomes the most important factor that influence our decision, how we behave. So that's where when we talk about Islamic economic system, we start by developing the argument on the economic agents theory. For example, at least at the moment, many Islamic economists would argue based on the behavior of the Islamic man. So who is this Islamic man? Then you can go to more behavioral aspect of it, which is not my area, but I know many Islamic economists there are people who are into this area. So that's behavioral aspects, and realize also that when we say behavioral aspect, there is a normative and positive aspect of that. Normative means Islam as a believers, as a mu'min, Muslim, we should, I use the word should, behave in certain ways. However, in reality, our behavior may not be as what we should behave. So if there is a gap between what should be and what is, then we need to narrow down the gap. Right? If you take a sample of Muslims today, in terms of their behavior against corruption, for example, my worry is we are so far away from what should from Islamic perspective. So hopefully with that idea, you can relate to buyers and sellers, point you raised earlier. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Doctor. One more from YouTube. Is there a concept of consumer protection in Islamic economics? If yes, how do we protect irrelevant inflation if we decide to allow sellers to fix price out of greed and self-centeredness?
Regulations from Islamic perspective. That's if you take out from Islamic perspective, just to make it easier first, yeah? Take out regulations. Is there any regulations to control inflation, right, Dr. Zira, the question? So regulation.
Sorry, Doctor. Yes.
Okay. Let's say we worry about price increase. The regulations, usually regulations is done by the authority, the government. All right. Most regulations done by the government is for the public interest. When it's come to inflation, for example, government would do something in order to protect the consumers. If you say you bring in the word Islamic protection, unique Islamic protection, you need to have a government that is very Islamically conscious government and would go to Quran and Sunnah and say, okay, this is from our divine sources. Let's try to put it into application. Right? That's can be done, should be done. At the moment, I would say most Muslim countries' government would not highlight on the Islamic way of doing it. They will just say, this is what government will do. Sometimes that's already very Islamic. Okay, so yeah, it is good to be very enthusiastic about having everything Islamic. However, we can also become very Islamic without calling the word first. That's my humble opinion, and Wallahu a'lam.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Now let's go to the Zoom. As usual, the question gets tougher for Dr. Nahar. All right. What about the economic embargo on Russia? Is that also a form of monopoly in which the West arbitrarily practice hoarding?
Okay, this is geopolitical issue. Social scientists would much more be fitting to answer this, but I would say this: Islamic countries should take advantage of the current situation to put the interest of the Ummah at the forefront given the challenging geopolitical situation. By that I means that if we can do something to increase more power, more influence, more control over the global market, global economy to the side of the Muslim countries, we should take it, because now the West are fighting among themselves. Somebody should appear in the middle and get some advantage point on that. So that's my opinion, and I better stop there.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Okay, this question is regarding monopoly. Assalamualaikum, respected sir. According to you, monopoly is not negative. It is just a price maker. But does it not support capitalist market that can exploit right of people without government interference?
Okay, I don't say monopoly. I give you all the perspective about monopoly, advantage and the disadvantages. How, just to make the point clear, even in a capitalist market, the regulators are very, very much against monopolistic behavior. That's why in the United States, they have what they call as the antitrust law. And as you can see in my example here, in some Western countries that promotes capitalism, they even ask their companies, big companies, right, to break up. That happens to Microsoft. They are watching Facebook, Google. They are not happy when they say monopoly or oligopoly. And if you follow the situation now among the vaccine manufacturers, they are suing one another over the patent now, right? And regulators definitely are watching on this behavior also, both in Europe and also in the United States. So that's therefore to associate capitalist economic system prefer monopoly. No, capitalist system actually promotes market freedom, and they, to achieve market freedom, they also promotes fair competition. Fair competition. All right, so that's my answer to that.
All right, thank you, Doctor. This is from our YouTube. In a country where there is an association of producers of a particular product, will the market be competitive? Won't they have power to control the price?
Can you repeat that, Zaza? I cannot get that question. When?
Okay. In a country where there is an association of producers of a particular product, will the market be competitive? Won't they have power to control the price?
Okay, this association, right? Industry association sometimes exists. Yeah, that's normal. This association, how to put it? Usually, the purpose of the association is not to. If the purpose of the association is to manipulate the economy, so that the producer becoming more profitable at the expense of the buyers, for example, that's not, that should be regulated. Usually what happens for industrial association, they will have meetings with the government, and government would listen to their complaints, to their concern, and government would become intermediaries between consumer association and industrial associations. Right, so they will sit together and to look after the interest of the economy as a whole. So that's my point on that.
Okay, we have another kind of geopolitical question. Maybe you can address this very quickly. Is the Arab oil embargo to the West for the benefit of Palestine a positive form of monopoly?
Definitely, Allah Ta'ala give us that power and we need to know how to use it. Yeah? We need to know how to use it. About this issue on Palestine, Israel, there is a movement, BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and BDS is, what's the S? BDS movement, basically. I cannot recall what the S stands for. There is a movement on that. And yeah, we always need to make dua for the Palestinian people. I have visited Masjid Al-Aqsa. I know the plight over there. I've seen the wall erected. Here, given this limited platform, I would say whatever power we can use that is helpful, we need to be wise also in using it. Wallahu a'lam.
All right. Maybe we can take one more question because you stopped early just now. Maybe we can take one more question.
Okay, no problem.
If you talk about Islamic value-based market structure, how can we enforce values into the market actors?
That's how we can we enforce value? Can value be pushed towards people? That's the first question we need to are we comfortable if the government, the big brother, push values upon us, or we are more comfortable if the value is already nurtured within us? Okay. The point here is sometimes when we think about Islamic system, we say government should do this. And when government want to do it, government will use some force. And when government force, many people are not comfortable. So over the long run, to achieve a more harmonious approach, education definitely is very important. And when we say Islamic education, I think that self-consciousness should be properly nurtured among the ummah. All right. Government wants the place to be clean, but are we clean? Are we responsible to keep our place clean? Should we wait for the government to issue fine, penalty, then only we want to clean the place? That's the question I pose back for us to think about it. Wallahu a'lam.
That's the homework question. Okay. I think there of course a lot more questions, Doctor, but then maybe it's fair to give you a break after 1.5 hours lecture. So
maybe I give you the email here. Any issues, you can email me.
Yes, as I always say that you can always approach our instructors personally if you have or you need further clarification on specific issues. We are really sorry for not taking, we are not able to take all the questions in the live session. But Alhamdulillah, thank you so much, Dr. Nahar, for your time, for your effort in sharing knowledge. May Allah bless you. Dear all participants, thank you so much for joining us. Inshallah, we'll meet again next week with other instructors and topics. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.